What's happening, everybody? Welcome to the lab. I'm your host, Josh Padilla. Sorry for the few-minute delay. But we are here, and we're ready to go. Good to see everybody tonight, and got an interesting show for you tonight. We're going to talk about some myths, fact, and fiction in the case of Summer Wells. Closing in on the 3-year mark of her going missing. And I can't believe that it's been that long, to be honest with you. You look back at all the things that have happened. And it is a very tragic case, one that's very dear to a lot of people. And with that being said, a lot of things get lost in translation, a lot of assumptions and speculation. And I've never thought that there was anything wrong with reasonable speculation. Conspiracy theories, something else entirely, in my personal opinion. Now, I would like to introduce you to our guests, fantastic guests we have from the Cold Case Foundation. We have Chris McDonough and Dr. Gary. How you guys doing? Good to see you both.
Aloha.
Howdy.
How are
That's not necessary. That's not necessary. Stop it. Stop it, Josh. That's okay for Dr. Gary. Fine. Go ahead. Dr. Gary, good to see you.
Good to see you as always. Long time no see.
I don't know what you guys are talking about or laughing about, to be honest with you. This is an inside joke between colleagues. Is this what's going on here? Are you snubbing me out here?
You're in the circle, buddy.
By the way, happy birthday, Dr. Gary.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. That was very
34
kind.
years old.
Oh,
24.
yeah. 34. Right.
24.
Oh, yeah. Right. It's the formaldehyde, that preserves.
Yeah. You're like Benjamin Button of psychiatry.
The formaldehyde.
I bathed in it. Yes.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. No, not 24 or 34, but that's quite all right. But it's very kind of a lot of the things people are saying are very nice.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that kind of coming up in the chat, and I did know, but I hope that you had a great birthday and that everything went well. Do you take your birthday off? I mean, typically, like if it's a Wednesday, if it's a Wednesday, does Dr. Gary go, you know what, shutting down for the day?
No, as a matter of fact, somebody said to me yesterday, "What's wrong with you? You don't stop seeing patients even on your birthday." And I said, "What better way is there to celebrate who I am as a human being than to be doing therapy with somebody on my birthday and not mentioning that it's my birthday?" But I have to laugh because I got a lot of messages from people who watched the show and who saw yesterday that on Chris's show he had said that it was my birthday, and the funniest thing is how many people said, "I knew you were a Pisces," which I got a kick out of. I mean, what can I say? If you are into that.
Yeah, astrology is a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Are you a Pisces, Josh? What are you?
I'm a Scorpio, and I don't even know what that means.
Gotta go.
Yeah.
Stinger.
Yeah, I don't know what that means. Like people say, "Oh, yeah, you're a Scorpio." That makes sense, and I go, "I don't know what you're talking about because I don't even know it. I really don't. No clue what it means." Like I said, I stay away from astrology, and I stay away from like the people that summon spirits and
necromancers.
Yeah, that stuff really gets to me, So I really do stay away from it.
Right.
Astrology, I don't know. I've never read about it. So,
well, I will say this: there was a study once that showed that the most common birth month for serial killers was November.
Great, thanks.
I got a kick out of it. But anyway, Chris, what about you?
I'm a Libra.
Chris is not a serial killer.
I get a balance.
You're a Libra. I don't know what that means either.
Balance.
I just got a kick out of it though. But
so you said you're a Libra?
Yeah, when I was born, they slapped my mother.
Yeah, well, it makes sense. Yeah. You came out so ugly. Say, we can't slap the baby. We got to do something.
Exactly. So, and then they rolled me over and told her she had twins.
Yeah. Face and butt look the same, huh?
That's how it works. So.
Oh my God. Well, we're off to a flying start as always here on the lab, and I appreciate that.
Beginning, yes.
Yeah. And welcome to the lab, everybody. We're going to do a heart. I'm just kidding. Anyway, thank you guys so much for being here. I know you're both extremely busy,
invitation, buddy.
And it's always a pleasure to have you guys on here. I know that people really do look forward to these shows with you guys. I hear about it, all the time, and they say, "Oh, I can't wait till you have them back on." And I said, "Look, I love having them on. They are the experts, contrary to what anybody believes to the opposite. They are experts in their field. They've been doing this a very long time, and like I said, I couldn't be happier to have you guys on. So what we are going to talk about tonight we're going to talk about myths of the Summer Wells case, because like I said in the beginning, there's a lot of them. And while it's stagnant, meaning with law enforcement, and you hear not very many updates and things like that, the speculation becomes more rampant. The conspiracies get deeper, and it's a real problem. Now, as somebody who's covered the case for quite some time, I've heard most of them, and then sometimes somebody brings me one and I go, I've never even heard that one before. I don't want to hear that one. And will you look into it? Absolutely not, because some are just really, really far out there. But I thought that we would cover the core misconceptions of this case. And so let me just go ahead and bring that up. The very first one that I've always, and that we get a lot, that is definitely not it. Okay. How do where'd you guys go?
We went away.
Okay. Well, it happens.
We're back.
How's that? All right, here we go. So now, do we need to explain what a myth is? I mean, is that something that we should probably do?
Go for it.
Or do people, I mean, because a myth, honestly, it's just a story with no factual basis from really the onset. I mean, it is considered, if you say, well, something's a myth, you would say, well, that's a lie. Well, I wouldn't say it's a lie. It's just misinformation, a story that isn't grounded in any substance whatsoever. Would you guys agree with that?
I would agree.
Yeah.
All right. And so the big one is the intruder kidnapping theory. It's a myth because there is nothing factual that's been presented to this theory. Okay. No intruder, no sign of forced entry. Candace has never described anybody that she saw. She never said that she saw anybody. Nobody was seen. Okay. And law enforcement has never said that they believe that there was an abduction, kidnapping, that they haven't taken, like you said, they haven't taken anything really off the table. But what say you, Dr. Gary, about this myth?
Well, first of all, I want to emphasize that I'm very grateful you're doing this topic, because I came into the Summer Wells case really with an invitation to appear on Chris's program some months ago. And I was sort of flying the plane, and building it at the same time as we were discussing it. And what I'm realizing as time goes on is that I really can't do that much research on this case independent of people like you two that have been up to it, to the neck for a long time, because the internet is just littered with this garbage, this absolutely untrue stuff. And it is so wrong. Some of it is so wrong. They almost have to get a little paranoid about who's putting the misinformation out there. what's the? I mean, there are always myths that surround these cases, but there is a special degree of BS that seems to surround this one. I mean, I don't know what that's about, but I have to tell you, there's a lot of garbage out there. So I'm personally very grateful about this. Now, regarding this particular myth, what became very clear to me as somebody who came into this right away is that everything from a profiling perspective, from a risk assessment perspective, from a psychological perspective, is entirely against the supposition that that child was taken by an intruder. And we've talked about this in great detail, but I mean, Chris, even if we started with the investigative level, the law enforcement level, wouldn't you immediately say that would be a pretty dopey, high-risk place to take a child? So why don't you start off on how ridiculous that idea is, and then I can talk about the psychological and other elements that make it kind of silly.
Okay, so you know, as we've all pounded the intruder / kidnap theory, the reason that seems so far out there are a couple of factors from an investigative analysis aspect. The first being what they call the victim risk continuum, and we've talked about that before many times, you know. And then the second is in what we call a suspectology, where you have all of this data from, you know, experts like Dr. Brucato and many, you know, hundreds others. And it's all been compiled as to how these guys think, react, and, you know, thoughts, feelings, and emotions equal behavior. So all of those thoughts, feelings, and emotions are taken into account from a criminal aspects, and they call that criminal behavioral analysis. And so for somebody to pick this particular geographic location, that particular day, that particular moment, statistically, it just doesn't line up with as we, you know, think about the last two child murders that have just occurred, one in Florida, you know, tragically, and then of course the other in Georgia. Those two children, the suspects, were known to those two victims. And in this particular case, within the first 3 hours, if you have not recovered that child, statistically, the life of that child goes down and down and down. And when the parents were first interviewed, and the boys and everybody up on top of that mountain, it became clear to the law enforcement authorities that although they can't say for sure 100%, you know, we got to take everybody out of the circle, what they have to say is everybody is still in the circle. And for that reason, the intruder theory just doesn't line up. It just does not line up,
right,
for a whole bunch of reasons.
Well, there are very simple things that seem to rule it out. I mean, for example, the notion that you had a whole bunch of dogs that didn't react at all if somebody went in there. The idea that nobody seems to have seen anybody leave. There were no indications when it was forensically examined that somebody broke into that place. The door, as I understand it, would have originally been blocked by a huge couch that's now not there anymore. You know, there are things like that that are weird. But then you also have the idea that if you have a home invasion to take a child, what kind of person would do that from a psychological profiling perspective? Well, first of all, there are two types of people who do that. I think we have to assume that it would be for sexually perverse reasons. There's really very few other reasons why anybody would do that. And there are the types that are groomers, that are kind of sophisticated psychopathic types that can slickly lure a person, build confidence, and then after a little while, you know, fool you that they're your only friend that you should trust, and then the other type is this kind of bizarre, socially inept type that needs to just walk into a house and take a kid, you know, or grab a kid on the street and pull them into a moving car kind of thing, because you can't talk and gain the confidence of the child. So already, if somebody did this, you'd have to be picturing a kind of a local weirdo, because people like that tend to be locals. They're disorganized, so they don't try to cover their tracks particularly well. So you'd have to picture some kind of local sexually perverse weirdo that happens to, go into the house and waits until the child, is done, comes downstairs and then snatches the child, concealing himself the whole time, right? And then manages to get the kid out of there with anybody seeing, right? While also being a completely disorganized oddball that would stick out like a sore thumb. That's already weird. That doesn't add up, right? And then you have this other element of it, that there are accusations that the father, in this case, has his own history of problems with kids and other things. And you would have to say, statistically, what is the probability of two people with these kind of perversions living in the same zip code and one happening to target the other? Like one goes into the house just to randomly snatch a kid, happens to take one where the kid would almost be happy to get out of the house because it was horrible there, like out of the frying pan into the fire. A more awful person comes, is living with you, and someone else awful comes and takes you. It doesn't make sense. And
Right.
As Judge Judy says, if it doesn't make sense, it's probably not true. Well, the fact is, it doesn't add up to the brain. And then you combine that with the risk assessment that Chris is talking about, and you start thinking, isn't it a lot more commonsensical that it was an inside situation and that there was a made-up story about the kid being snatched? And that, using Occam's razor, seems to be the simpler thing that jives with the facts of what was going on there. Now, I have talked repeatedly on this program, including on this program, about this construct that I put into the literature that I call elimination murder, right? Which is this idea that there is a child who is or a person who is an obstacle to a romance, to getting away with something. They're a witness to something. It could be a kid that has like marks on them or something, and you got to get them out of the way. They know too much. They're keeping you from a romance, a job, money, an inheritance, whatever. And you have to eliminate them. Usually the people who do that are a little bit, on the spectrum of personality aberrations, but they're not master criminals. And as a consequence, they always come up with the same dumb story that an outside person with no real motivation at all popped in and did this, and I have an alibi of why it wasn't me, and I can't make heads or tails out of it. Oh, please, pretty please bring my child home. And I cannot tell you how many times we have seen this story. Chris, you and I could probably rattle off 20 cases where people use that cover story, right? I think we saw that, for example, in the Murdoch case, that phony cover story, that an intruder. And the funniest thing is, the more psychopathic the offender, the more out of the way they go to make the cover story believable. So in the Murdoch case, you even have someone going so far as to have someone hurt him so that he could make it look like the family's been targeted, that kind of thing. So they'll go really far with this nonsense. But wouldn't you say, Chris, that I think that myth, that notion that it's even on the table that there's been a home intrusion, that's been dismissed even by law enforcement.
Yeah, it was immediately
right
set to the side. And I think we've just seen that. I misspoke about the Georgia situation. I meant Florida and then Texas, where Audrey Cunningham was just recently abducted and murdered and thrown in the river there in Trinity River.
Right.
But that acquaintance of that individual in her circle of influence, that's the type of scenario that you would expect to see in this type of problem. Maybe not necessarily a stranger, but somebody who was familiar with and or who had access to that particular piece of property in the family and the children.
Well, and a local.
At a local, right, local level. Mm-hmm.
What I always found interesting about this as well is if the intruder kidnapping theory was actually a viable option, to law enforcement, why did they never put out to the public that there's somebody going around stealing kids? Right. I mean, when the Idaho 4 happened, and they held a press. They said, we don't feel that there's any threat to the public, which I didn't know how they could say that right away, but they did. I mean, if there's somebody actually, a stranger, going out and kidnapping children, wouldn't it behoove law enforcement to hold a press conference and say, hey, there's somebody out there, we believe, randomly abducting children, or something along those lines?
Yeah, that would have been the first press conference. That would have been the one where, the press would have been peppering, the sheriff's department and TBI, saying, hey, do we have some lunatic out there, just like they did. If you look at the press coverage of these last two incidents, okay, in the Audrey Cunningham case, the sheriff came right out and said, look, we've got A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. Okay, we need your help. We're looking to find out where this, it was a Suburban, where is this car? And then they got the subject, they locked him in. And in this particular case, you have this myth of a red truck involved in this situation. Now, we're not saying that red truck may have driven by, 110 Ben Hill, i.e. on the main road on the bottom, etc. But it kind of correlates into this idea, if you interview all the tree people around that day. Okay. And it's the same principle. I mean, if this guy's in a red truck, first of all, he's got to get out of that truck. Hey, second, he's got to park that truck in a place that, if he's already made the decision to go up that hill, hypothetically, and steal a child, okay, now either there has to be a second person waiting at the truck, or the truck has to be in a position anticipating the child is not going to fight, that you have total control over that child. And either A, you can get that child back through the driver's door, and or throw her in the passenger door and control her while you go around to get into the driver's door. Okay. So those dynamics in of itself, those are the kind of things that we don't necessarily always think about. It is the minutia behaviors that create a whole bunch of problems for suspects. And we see it in the Cunningham situation, where they find her backpack. They lock him into, where were you? Well, I just happened to be over by the Trinity Bridge, etc. Okay. But in this case, there's just a talk. There's a myth of, well, there's this red, truck with a rack and all this other stuff. And so then you look for a point of origin. Where did that information come from? And a lot of this information, if not 95% of it, came from the people up on the hill. They presented it into the environment, right? Wouldn't you say, Dr. Brucato, any thoughts on that, Gary? I mean, from your perspective?
Oh, I think that's an excellent point. I think you should keep going.
Okay, so I mean, at that point, thanks. Happy birthday. And
no balloons this time?
What about you, Josh, though? I mean, just throwing that up at you. Huh? It's not your birthday, exactly.
Hilarious.
But you see, I mean, as we really think about it, this is what investigators do. They have meetings just like this, and everybody has an opinion, everybody has a voice, and all voices and all opinions are heard. It doesn't necessarily mean they're right, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong.
Right.
But what you do is we call it a circle up, where everybody gets together and we say, okay, let's talk about, the red truck up the dog trail, down the dog trail with a 5-year-old under your arms, not screaming, not yelling, but, just going down that with 13 dogs on the property, red truck sitting somewhere.
Once again, what did the dogs do when you went up there?
Oh, they went nuts. The dogs went nuts. Yeah, in fact, Karen didn't want to get out of the car. We've talked about that at length.
Very, very interesting. But I think it's important for us to emphasize that no one's been charged here. So, people are innocent until proven guilty. And here there isn't even a charge. I think we have to say that. But I also think it's important to emphasize that This idea has been completely ruled out. It's like you have to take off the table home invasion.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like they're working that angle at all. And even in the early press conferences, they said, when we have a suspect, we will update the public. That's never happened. There has never been, like, when they say, a suspect, they're talking about an intruder, a home invasion, somebody who, they're not talking about the parents or anything like that. And that suspect talk came down the line, and the parents are absolutely suspects. I don't care what kind of jargon you want to say. The sheriff said everybody's surrounding Summers' case, and if you don't think that the parents aren't surrounding that case, they're suspects. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Don would admit he's a suspect. He knows that he's not been cleared. So that is another thing. Well, they're not suspects. And another myth that we could have got to that I didn't, and we can touch on that another time, is the lie detectors. I mean, that's another huge myth that, they're saying, well, we passed them. But let's move on to this myth, the tree trimmer theory. Okay. Because this one sort of took off a little bit. It was a little bit after, when people were really grasping who was around that day, and that there were some tree trimmers around the property the day that Summer went missing. Why would the tree trimmers make or not make a good suspect, Dr. Gary?
Well, first of all, what exactly would be the theory here? That there was a whole bunch of people that were working like a full-time job or part-time job, getting along with everybody, the type of people that can engage in that kind of job while simultaneously being a kind of disorganized, impulsive, psychopathic, paraphilic, local pervert who takes kids off for sexual purposes and probably kills them. I mean, this is a ridiculous thing. That is not the kind of work that kind of person would be doing. It's not the kind of activity they would be doing. I mean, wouldn't you say, Chris? It's a mismatch with the profile of the kind of individual that would be a home invader who snatches a child like that.
Yeah, and you have to throw into the mix, where's Hank? Okay. Oh, well, Hank's out grabbing a 5-year-old. He'll be right back. It's just, and then Hank shows back up with a 5-year-old or no 5-year-old. That means that 5-year-old somewhere in that geographic region is there, i.e., if he didn't take her back to the work site, okay, or if he left the job, the first thing the cops are going to do is get hold of that company and say, let's see everybody's timesheets, number one, and they're going to try to find out what the accounting is for each one of these employees on the scene. And then they're going to flush them through the system to make sure that they're not RSOs, working for the company. And once they've done that, then it's kind of like, okay, let's interview them. And then they interview them. And if there's anybody who's just even on the cusp, they're going to throw them through, a poly. But you're going to have, an extensive amount of pressure immediately on top of this company because they were close and nearby. Mm-hmm. And that's where the card team and the FBI and TBI come into play. That was probably their roles, to flush these guys out.
All right.
Yeah, that's a great point, Chris, about that. They would have done background checks because the implication of the statement, and I think you're 100% right, is that the type of person who would do this probably would have done it previously, because people like that don't just do it once. It could have been a first time, but I severely doubt it. So that I guess what you're suggesting is the person who did this, if he existed, I think he's probably a fabricated person. But if he existed, he would be on the record locally as an offender. Would you say, Chris? I mean, there'd be a very small number of offenders, and don't you think that that's what law enforcement did? Went and talked to the local offenders.
And that's what we used to call. We'd be in that circle, right? And we would say, "What's his shoe size?" Okay, And, and then the next follow-up question would be, have we run them around the world? Meaning, do we know what this guy's shoe size is? And have we done everything within our power, knowing that we only have a certain amount of time? You remember the old saying, the first 48?
Yeah.
Well, that's a true statement, right? I mean, and just so these guys here, because they were so close, were under as much scrutiny as everybody up on top of that hill that day. I can assure you of that.
And it's also very important to note that there has not been one credible sighting of Summer since her disappearance. I know that, and you would think that with that many people surrounding, like tree trimmers, they're not taking their Honda Civics to work. They're getting in work trucks and they're driving there together, like every other tree company does. It's just not really, to me, it's just not something that's really even possible.
Yeah, but those people don't take the child to keep the child. They take the child to commit perverted behaviors, and then generally have to eliminate the child by dumping them, usually not alive, unfortunately, somewhere which isn't very far away from the place where they got picked up. I mean, Chris, wouldn't the expectation be that if an offender picked this kid up, a disorganized oddball local, to engage in perverse acts, within a couple of days, that child would probably turn up somewhere dumped?
Yeah, within the first 3 hours, there's a high probability, statistically, the child's life is taken. No longer than 24 hours, statistically. Right. But that, I mean, there are always oddballs, right, Gary? I mean, there's always
unusual ones, but we're talking statistically here,
right? And we just saw these last two cases, one in Texas, one in Florida, which are textbook. Okay? They're textbook of taking children for SA.
Yes.
Within 3 hours, though, both of these children were gone. And in this case, this suspect, if we're which we've already taken it off, but if any one of these tree trimmers was of the inkling, which Dr. Brucato and I agree 1,000%, number one, they're not going to be out cutting trees and then all of a sudden realize, hey, there's a 5-year-old in a basement right up the hill here. Okay, I got to get up there and get this 5-year-old because I got to release my sexual gratification. Okay, and then go back to work, for the day. I still got trees to trim. Okay.
Right.
It ain't happening.
By the way, why were they being trimmed? Just a standard thing they came by, or was there?
No, they were cutting it. Yeah, off of the power lines. So their contract, to the power company.
So the argument would be that they just serendipitously saw a child and got inspired to engage in that kind of activity.
Yeah, and they had 2 to 10 minutes to make the decision and know that child was going to be in that basement.
And they cut trees all over the county, all over. I mean,
rather preposterous.
Yeah. So like that, and that would go back to law enforcement not saying, hey, there's a danger to the public. We suspect a tree trimming company of stealing. As ridiculous as that sounds, it goes back to that original statement. If we have a description of a suspect, if we gather one, then we will let you know. That's never happened. And it's just the little details in Leslie Earhart, the public information officer for TBI. People have kind of given her, say she says a lot without saying a lot. It's really in the language, the cooperation, when they ask, are the parents cooperating? And she says, I'm not going to define cooperation because it doesn't seem to help the case, only makes it worse. And you're sitting there going, well, Leslie, if the answer is yes, then there's no need for that. If the answer is no, we understand that. The answer might as well be no if you say, I'm not going to define cooperation. We all know what cooperation is. Okay. I mean, that's fairly simple.
Well, one thing I would only disagree with and push back on Hawkins and TBI at this point is if we look at the case in Texas, and we use Audrey as almost a cookie cutter. Right? The one thing the sheriff did is he kept the public informed, and he came right out and said, look, there's a guy named Don Stephen McDougal who is a person of interest. If you saw his vehicle at any location, yada, 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 if they are under the microscope of this investigative team, then they should put into the environment what that looks like. Now, of course, you don't come out and say they're the ones, but you can come out and tell the public these individuals are persons of interest at this point in this part of the investigation. If anybody has information, i.e. conversations or any information relating to this, please call blah, 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 blah. Okay? Now, what you've done there is you have lit the public. And we talked about this last night, the public is who will solve this crime. Okay? It'll be that one piece that says, you know what, I've been holding on to this for 3 years. I saw them all together, and guess what? This person was with them. Yada, yada, yada. Okay? You never know what kind of information comes out when you put information out. In the case that we're dealing with right now, Gary and I are working, with the Marin situation. The hat was critical information that the suspect was wearing in LA. Okay? They held that in Hartford, in Maryland, instead of putting it into the public arena. Now everybody has seen it in the sketch with the suspect wearing the hat. Okay? There was nothing wrong with doing that initially. Okay? And this is the same situation. If Hawkins County wants to kick this thing into high gear, okay, and prevent some of what we're talking about here, quite frankly, then they need to feed the beast. And that's what we used to call it. Have we fed the beast? And you get a PIO, a public information officer, to come over, you debrief that PIO and say, this is the information we want to put into the environment. Okay? The red truck is interesting. However, we have a belief that it's not necessarily involved. If that's the case, and you tell the public the truth, and the public knows what to do with it, they grab it. And then your phone starts ringing. And you go, holy cow, okay, thank you very much. Yeah, we saw the guy, and guess what? She was with him. Really? Where were you? Well, I'm at a gas station. And that's just what happened in Audrey Cunningham's case.
Yes. Yeah, that was vital, obviously.
Yeah. That's because they put information into the environment and the public responded.
Right.
And in a case like this, if they get no response from the public.
Right. It's very interesting because as a psychologist, I'm intrigued by the idea of misinformation and how it spreads, and why myths stay alive. And the idea of the press telling inaccurate information either on purpose or accidentally goes back a long way. For example, one of the most infamous incidents in the history of journalism, which nobody even remembers anymore, is that in 1835 there was the famous incident where the Sun published, there's a periodical published news report that they could see on the surface of the moon that it was populated by bat people that looked a lot like beavers. And that piece of information spread all over the place, even when it was retracted, that people believed it was true for a long time. Anyway, as a simple example, there was an experiment done in the 80s where they got a bunch of people together and they made a fake news report. And the news report said that there was a huge warehouse fire, and that when the firemen went into the house, into the building, they opened up a closet that was filled with incendiary things that made the fire much worse. And then they printed a tiny retraction that said, "We were in error. The closet was in fact empty." And they found that 90% of people refused to accept the retraction and still believed that the closet was filled with incendiaries and that the first story was right and the retraction was wrong. And there have been all kinds of attempts to explain this phenomenon. Some people think it has to do with the idea that once we've encoded information, we're lazy and we don't wish to change it or create a hole in that narrative to put in new information. There's also this idea that like the first instinctive impression is true, and now we're covering it up with the retractions. And there's also, this whole idea that, we want things to be rapid, to not be nuanced, to not require a lot of complication. And then, of course, there's the repetition factor. Listen, I don't have to get into it, but you certainly see in the current political environment that the secret is if you say something enough times, a whole bunch of people will believe it. And it doesn't matter how completely and totally bunko it is. Repetition rehearses things into the brain, and then you refuse to give them up. The problem with this is, of course, that what you wind up with is a situation where we could do a show like this 100 times, and there'll be someone who says, they're trying to say these are myths, but we all remember that the first report said yada, yada, yada. And that's what's so scary about this. And unfortunately, there are people who depend on that process to fool you. And but wouldn't you say, Josh?
And
problem. Right.
It is one of those things where when you bang a drum so much, you get the beat stuck in your head. Don and Candace, when it comes to this case, they all tell the same story, especially initially. And the story, anybody that has followed this case could repeat verbatim. And some people just, like you said, I don't believe it. I don't believe what they have said, but there are people, no matter how ridiculous a story, you're right. Some people will believe it. And to be honest with you, without being harsh or critical of them, it's an absolutely ridiculous story to me.
But that's just it. There's also this problem that people think the simpler thing has to be the truer thing. So that's a kind of a confirmation bias to have. Now, there is such a thing as Occam's razor, right? When you have to get really elaborate to tell the truth, sometimes the simpler thing is true. But the problem is that people use that to their advantage. And they'll say, oh, come on, what makes more sense? That there was this whole elaborate reason to get rid of this kid? Doesn't it make more sense that some pervert just broke in the house and grabbed her? But the fact is, it doesn't make more sense when you sit down and you make proper deductions and you have experience. It starts to not make any sense at all. It's a chain of facts that are overly complicated that add up to a conclusion that doesn't make sense. And it keeps getting repeated in the environment as if there's any truth to this at all. And then you have things like family members going on television shows and weeping and getting dramatic, whatever. And then you start to look like a monster for questioning it.
Yeah.
So that's the other piece of it, right? We start to get upset about. But I think we have to just put it out there that people need to be more critical in their thinking when they take in news stories. And now, to declare this tree trimmer story a myth, did the police rule it out as a myth? Did they officially rule it out?
Not that I know of. Chris?
No, I know that they interviewed everybody.
Yeah.
And they would have hooked somebody up, or at least put a little pressure into.
Well, and that leads me into a question as well for both of you.
Right.
Don't you think? Oh, excuse me. Don't you think that
I'm sorry.
It was my sister happens to call when I didn't mute she does this all the time. She doesn't call me anytime, I'll just be sitting there. The phone doesn't ring then. But
I don't know what is happening right now. I don't know if I'm having a stroke or if we're just all being goofy.
No, when you hear this
moment,
you're having
okay. Yes,
okay.
That's right.
Go ahead.
Marks that's broken in the house. Yes.
Pick it up, Josh.
Don't you think it would be advantageous of law enforcement to clear some people?
Yes.
Yes.
Because there was there are neighbors surrounding this situation. They all say, look, we didn't have anything to do with this. Dawn and Candace have both accused them of doing it. There's just a lot of different things, the people that have never been cleared up. And by the way, I don't think that it would be fair at all to Dawn and Candace, if they have nothing to do with this, to leave them to hang out to dry the way that law enforcement has. They have done nothing to dampen the belief of the core, if that makes sense. Most people, I think the most people that follow this case, and I say most people, think that the parents have more knowledge of what happened than, and I'm not accusing them of doing that. I'm just saying that most people believe that they have more knowledge. Now, there are some that don't, which is fine. But why, what problem would it be to say, you know what, we're not looking at this person, we're not looking at that person? Because you can always tap them back in if something comes up, right?
Yep.
Just because they say, oh yeah, we cleared that person, and then they say, well, we have some really incredible evidence.
If they don't, what happens is what's happening, and it's been happening, right? It turns into what I'll call the TMMA, right? The Tennessee, fighting situation, the Ben Hill edition. And you end up, with these mismatches going on. I mean, just on another channel, you had mentioned that, neighbors were going at each other on the other channel. Well, that's self-preservation is what that is. And then you get this one guy, within a week or a month or whatever it was, where he tries to go in and, take a 12-year-old boy that was out on the lawn. Remember that guy? I forget his name. Okay. Well, all these guys, they become cannon fodder for misinformation.
Right.
They become the myth. Well, it could have been that guy. It could have been that guy. And so the authorities need to, put information out, just like these other two, even in Madeline Soto's case in Florida, they came right out and said, look, the boyfriend is a person of interest. Lo and behold, he ends up being the guy. Okay. And the same thing with the other, with Audrey Cunningham's situation in Texas. This guy is a person of interest. That there is nothing wrong with doing that. In fact, that motivates leads. It drives leads. In this case, we have everybody's on the table. Well, who's everybody? Are we talking the neighbors? Are we talking the ice cream man? Are we talking, the person at Walmart? Who are we talking about?
Right.
The public needs to have clarity, and that's how leads are generated, through clarity. Okay.
Right.
Gary, what are your thoughts?
I was just thinking that one day we've got to do a show on experts teaching you how to read a news article.
Really?
Right? I mean, how to break it down and understand what exactly you could read between the lines, what you should question, what is a hypothesis that should leave you scratching your head, what is probably going to get dismissed later. I mean, I just keep thinking about that as all of this as a result of a process where no matter how ridiculous the thing is you put out there, there'll always be somebody that believes you. And look, I mean, for God's sake, there were people who believed that there were bats with beaver faces living on the moon in 1835. I mean, that's ridiculous, but it happened, and it persisted a long time. So, I just want to put that out there. I personally think that this tree trimmer one is one of the dumber of the. I mean, it's so ridiculous. Chris, you and I would have probably thrown that one out the window in about 5 minutes if we were looking at this case. And what you say?
I agree.
It's ridiculous. I mean, it's not even, you do your due diligence, and you just go, okay, next.
Yeah.
Now, where does that leave milling around? I mean, if once we've eliminated these tree people, isn't there also a story that there was a man at the swimming hole?
I don't know about what.
The young man.
Yes, I heard something like that. Yeah.
He was with Candace that day. Friend. He was a friend of the family, but he was at the time, what was he, Chris? 13, 15? He was pretty young.
Oh, not a man, a boy.
A boy.
Like a supposed witness that can't be found, that kind of thing.
No, they know who he is and they've interviewed him.
Good. And so he exists. Okay, that's good. I always wanted to know. So that it's not a myth that there was a person there.
There was another person, besides Candace, Summer. There was the boy that was with the family that day, at least part of the day, and that and there's some weird nuances, things about that as well.
So, who are all the people? Who are all the players in this little drama that are actually there within the radius on that day when this child is taken? Where is everyone? Who's in the yard? Where's Don? Where's Candace?
Don claims that he was at work, 45 minutes to an hour away in a different county. That's never been verified by anybody. Nobody's ever been able to pin that down. The only people that say that are Don and Candace. There are rumors and speculation that Don has said that he wasn't there all day. I've heard from credible sources, but no concrete proof that he was not that he was at work all day, or that he wasn't at work all day. That the people do believe Don was around that area. Some people, but he claims absolutely not.
But people are saying in the chat that the man I'm thinking of is a person who was supposedly on 110. Do you know what that means?
Oh, the mysterious. Okay, so yeah, I know what you mean now. The mysterious. So there is there was a story that Don was calling Candace and said that there was a man on the hill that day that was looking at children. Was that right, Chris?
Yeah, lurking and touching kids.
Now, the three kids that were there were the three boys. We don't know where they were or what they were doing.
So this is the person that probably doesn't exist. This fool on the hill here, right? We don't. This person doesn't exist.
Well, that came from the young boy. He was the one that said that he overheard that conversation happening.
Wait. So do we believe this person is real or not? This person that's on the hill touching children.
No, I don't believe him.
So what reason would he have to make that convenient fact up?
I mean, it would cause some questions, wouldn't it?
I mean, it's a little strange. And I mean, listen, that's very weird. Now, who else is? I mean, I'm just trying to picture this little Shakespearean drama here. So we've got the kid is in the house in that dungeon that's supposed to be a bedroom. Yeah. Where are the other kids? Where's grandma? Where's and this is going to start getting into another one of the myths, right? About the idyllic home they all live in and all that, exactly. Right? But I just want to understand because, I want to be able to picture it. I need to visualize it. So where is everyone exactly?
You have the mother and the grandmother outside of the trailer planting cacti flowers, succulents, if you will.
Oh, okay.
Transplanting
to make it more beautiful.
Yeah, it was to spruce up the property, and that Summer was there with them helping as she ate a piece of peppermint candy. Wanted to go inside. Candace walked her 10 feet to the door, told her brothers, who were all three in the living room upstairs, to keep an eye on her. She wants to go to the basement and play with her toys. And then the Summer walks through the house, goes down those stairs into the basement all alone to play. Candace then walks back over 10 to 15 feet to the trailer, goes back, according to her, 2 minutes later to check on Summer, which later stretched out to 5-10 minutes. Yelled for her, didn't hear a thing, and she was just gone. Now, that brings us to another myth.
Right, exactly.
The picture of a happy family, okay?
Oh, yes.
And as it says there, and there is eyewitness testimony that contradicts this idea, and not just one eye, not just two eyes. There's been several people with knowledge and around that situation that said that that's not the case.
I want to add another dynamic to that.
Go ahead, Chris.
There are police reports and a SWAT team that show the dynamics of that home. Remember when Don was wanted, they brought in a SWAT team to go get him.
Yeah.
And he was hiding.
Yeah.
So hiding in the house, home sweet home. Hey, who is it? It's the special weapons and assaults. We're here. Okay.
Well, I've seen it with my own eyes.
Yeah. He's hiding
on camera. I've seen it with my own eyes. The dysfunction and the anger and the it doesn't strike me. I think if it was a happy home, that even the children that weren't abducted by a stranger would still be in that house, wouldn't you think?
I think that about sums it up.
Yeah, yeah. But to be fair,
you talk about the restraining order. To be fair,
which one? The one that Candace put on Dawn and then took away? Well, that's happened a couple of times with a couple of different people with Dawn. But yes, the police reports are there that Dawn is an angry drunk who abuses his family, and that meaning, yelling, throwing things. But Candace even went so far as to say that she's afraid that he would hurt the children. This is a sworn statement. Okay. Which, by the way, I don't know the legality of this, but I have no idea how you say all that stuff, sign it, and then drop the charges. I don't get that. Can you explain that to me, Chris?
It's called battered women syndrome. She's in a circle.
Yeah, but how do they let them, why would they? I mean, so then she lied.
She's afraid of him. It's never a good thing when the media says, hey, can we talk about some of your domestic abuse? And then the individual being interviewed goes, well, that was just a misunderstanding. And she's apologized.
It's nice of her to do.
Really? And by the way, that's on the news. WJHL.
Yeah, that's what he said. She apologized. It was very kind of her.
Yeah, go figure. Happy home.
By the way, that happened with his first wife too. The same kind of attack. Same grabbing by the throat, up against the wall, punching, things like that. And then a couple days later, the charges get dropped. I just don't understand how you can fill that paper out, sign it, say it didn't happen. Wouldn't that carry some criminal charges in and of itself, or no?
Yeah. It's very interesting. There's a psychological test that's used with children called the house tree person, where you make them draw, a house and a tree and a person, as the title indicates. And you can tell a very great deal about if there's trauma or abuse or emptiness or neglect or so forth and the like. And every time I saw pictures of that place, it looked like the worst imaginable house tree person drawing come to life. It looks like the kind of drawing a kid would do who was living in a state of neglect, psychological neglect, emptiness, barren, kind of wasteland world, where there's nothing homey or warm about it. And what's so disturbing about it is that they seem to go out of their way to paint the picture, recognizing that it was outrageous, to paint the picture in the cover story that they were doing all these things that made them almost like, mother and father of the year, right? So I almost want to say about the peppermint, if I were sitting in the room, I would have said, nice touch. The peppermint was a nice touch, nice little touch there, right? That it's like I almost want to say, I salute your effrontery and your imagination, but, your skills and improvisation.
Mm-hmm.
But it shows that these are look, obviously we don't know this for sure, but it suggests that these are people who know what would be the right thing to do, but they're just not doing it.
Mm.
But I mean, I wish that you had pictures to show people. I mean, that room alone that kid was living in is an outrage. I mean, it's outrageous. I said one time on a prior episode that it looked like an oubliette, like one of those medieval dungeons that a kid would go in or a person would go in to just rot until they died, not eat, be in the total darkness and just die. And that is what it looks like, right? I mean, don't you guys agree? It looks medieval.
Yeah,
Yes.
Dank, kind of scary. So I don't know. I just think that the emphasis has to be placed here on how they seemed to be making a very great effort to exaggerate the degree to which it is not true that this was a horrendous environment.
Yeah.
What you want to tell the audience the reason the other kids aren't there?
Well, they've never. So there's never been. This is according to Don, but he says that it was the environment. It was too dangerous once Summer went missing. That there were people threatening the family and coming around and driving up to his house, and that he said he begged CPS to take his kids. I know that is not true. I know that he was told to surrender his kids within 24 hours, or else, basically. And
okay. So, I mean, think about that, right, Josh? Think about that, right? What a great point you make. Yeah, and I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, I mean, you think about here. Let's just play this out for a minute, okay? The CPS worker. First of all, the CPS worker is there. Okay, that's a red flag, right? And the second is the CPS worker goes, okay, well, we're here for the children. And now Don says, go ahead and take them. Go ahead, just take them away.
yeah,
Please. Because now, today, right, what does he say today?
he says that CPS stole them.
Yeah, CPS took my kids. They stole my kids. Okay. Well, which one is it? Did he say, go ahead, take them? Or did CPS steal them? I mean, it's kind of like, yeah, McDonough was up here and he took her. Okay. He took Summer. Oh, Josh took Summer. Dr. Brucato, Gary, you'll be next. You've somehow ended up on that property that day, and you have Summer that day. So, finish your thought process. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, no, that's exactly right. Is that the goalposts always move with Don, when he says, well, the reason was because there were open investigations, admittedly, by CPS. Don has said, that there was allegedly a CPS worker the night before Summer goes missing at his house at 6 p.m. to close their case. They drove all the way up to his house to close the case. I don't know that much about CPS, but I do know a few people that do. And they said that just would never happen. Things like that that's not how they close cases. And then, so this is just what I think. I think that there was a point in the investigation that while they were talking to people, they got a very clear idea of what was going on in that house. And they took the children because it was unsafe, like Don said, but not for the reasons that Don said. Now, that's just my personal belief, because it took about 3 weeks for the boys to be taken, close to a month, right? Something like that. So when they were taken, you would think you were going, well, look, we've interviewed all these people. These kids can't be there anymore because they're in danger too. When you would look at just the history of Don and Candace. And like I said, everything just seems to turn back around and point right in their face. And that's not me. That's not me saying that. That's just every turn seems to just go in a circle, and point right back to Don and Candace. Like, what exactly is going on here? There is a huge story buried here somewhere. Okay. And who knows what day it started exactly, But like you kind of said, Dr. Gary, about the elimination murder theory, was it that she had a story to tell? Was she going to tell something? Did they not want her to? I mean, were they afraid of physicals, getting shots, her going to school, making friends with teachers? Now, I know people say, well, she was at church. Well, the parents were there at church too. So they kind of had an eye like, oh, well, get back over here. You don't get to do that at school. I've seen kids taken out of classrooms before because they have bruises on their face and they can't explain why the bruises are there, or they won't say why. That'll get a kid pulled out of a class very quickly. And is that possible? Well, I think it is. I think it is possible.
Well, whenever if we are suggesting, let's take this in a very mechanical, let's make a sort of syllogism where we break this down logically. Okay, so let's say supposition 1 is people claim there's been a home invasion. Point 2 is there's no evidence of a home invasion. Therefore, the people that said there was either made it up or were mistaken. If we go the route of mistaken, what alternative explanation is there? It doesn't make. If we go the route of made it up, we then have to ask, okay, next in the logical syllogism, why would they do that? To hide something that they themselves did. Okay, well, if they themselves did it, then you wind up with having to conclude that it was a cover story. And if it's a cover story, clearly something horrendous happened that they're trying to eliminate. So that you wind up with this, like you're painted into the corner of concluding that. So if you conclude it, well, then it raises the question: why is there no evidence of it? Why is that? Because there must have been some kind of cleanup process or elimination of all the evidence. Now, where is this body? I mean, that's the whole thing. I mean, I think we have to presume that whatever happened to the child happened in that house, and then the child was eliminated. Now, Chris, isn't that your supposition also?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. Let's say it's an accident. Let's hypothesize the child falls down the stairs, or
that could be a possibility.
Right? Or the child's left in the car, and it's a heat exhaustion, yada yada,
right?
And she's unconscious. Okay, well, there, immediately they have the advantage because the body hypothetically is not going to start breaking down for a little time, and
right.
so they've got time, and so you're not going to get a lot of physical evidence at the house. You're not going to, and the physical evidence that you're going to get is maybe Summers. Well, Summer lives there. Okay, if you don't have any evidence of trauma, i.e., blows or anything like that, where you're going to get some type of blood spatter analysis or something to that effect, then what you have is the child being transported. So the vehicle that was utilized to transport becomes the primary crime scene. And then the secondary crime scene is where the body is discovered, or what we call the dump site. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, without item number 2, the dump site, the district attorney's offices, and there's almost this reluctance of DAs around this country going on right now to prosecute a no-body case. Mm-hmm. When you could have all the evidence in the world staring you in the face, and they want, the body. Well, we don't know how much they have. We suspect they have a tremendous amount because, again, those boys, the other surviving boys, the 3 boys, they're not home yet. And June 15th will be 3 years. Okay? And those boys are still not home. Well, that in of itself speaks master volumes about a secondary case going on involving the children, the other children. And so you have one lane going down a criminal investigation potentially, and then you have a secondary criminal investigation going on in relationship to the 3 children. Well, if you cross them over too soon and you don't have the body, okay, that could impact either case. Okay. It could be, you charge them with neglect, you charge them with child abuse, you charge them with all the other stuff, and then you take it to trial, and all of a sudden, you don't have all the answers, but you got most of them. Most juries will go, yep, guilty. Okay. But DAs are hesitant today for some reason to do that. And so they wait for the perfect case. And I think this is a situation that is in that potential lane, without pulling any punches back here, just kind of setting it out there. In my opinion, this is potentially one of the problems going on in this thing, and Josh and I, we've talked about this at length. The fact that those boys are not back at that house, that is the state of Tennessee speaking and telling the world there's more here, to your point, behind the scenes. Curtain number 2, you can kind of peek in and surmise, but curtain number 1 and 3 is where all the evidence is, and they're not showing that curtain. They're not pulling that back.
So after the initial search was scaled back, okay, and then which went on for a week or so, and then the minor searches, and then pretty soon no more searches, okay, and then they go back. The boys are taken out of the house. Then they say, we are planning targeted searches in the middle of the woods. Okay. When I heard that, this was 6 months after, I believe, somewhere around there. They went back 6-8 months after. You get that feeling in your stomach, and you go, well, you don't look for an alive body in the middle of the woods. It's a 5-year-old girl. That's not what you do. And it was almost like, okay, well, we don't have a lot of urgency anymore because we believe, you wouldn't look in the woods if you believed that she was alive. Okay. You just, maybe you would, but it doesn't seem likely. They're not going to grocery stores stalking, people that are doing, that they think may have kidnapped her. They're looking in the woods. So they pull the children out of the home. They're targeting wooded areas. And basically, to me, that just told that they're just looking for her body. They're not looking for an enslaved child that had been trafficked. They're not, that's just the feeling that I got out of that. And
how extensively did they forensically examine the inside of the home? Did they check for blood traces, hair, etc.? Or was it a sort of half-baked attempt? Chris, do you know, from the investigative perspective, did they go in there and seriously look that place over?
Yes. Yes. I don't know what they found, obviously, but there was enough. Whenever the card team shows up, the child abduction response group out of the FBI,
right?
Whenever they show up, there is a flushing and a baptismal by fire kind of concept that shows up, and a lot of the searching and all this other stuff that's going on, not only exterior but interior to the house. And there's only 2 possibilities at that point. It's either a walk away, okay, i.e. the child walked out into the woods, and we've heard Pruitt even say that a couple of times, the lead investigator. Well, it's still possible she could have walked away from the back door or whatever. And then the second is it an abduction, and or do we have to eliminate that? Okay. Well, the card team came right out and said this is not an abduction. Okay. Period. In fact, when they packed up and left, they were done. Okay. And so that means they pushed it back to Hawkins County and TBI and said, don't leave the house. Okay. There's more going on here. Okay. And That's the assumption now. Then you have to think about, okay, well, what are they doing inside the house, right? And to Vetco, Amber Alert issue for child that walk away. They do that because there was a mention of a red truck. Then, so what they're doing is they're covering their butt.
Yeah, could that have been just because that's the way that they could get an Amber Alert out?
Yeah, they're covering their rear by throwing the Amber Alert out because, just in case, right? Everything's on the table.
Do you think that the red truck doesn't exist?
Well, I think it may have existed, but there's a higher probability that it was driving by and or in the area. Again, you have to think like the suspect here. Okay. I mean, the suspect is, one, bringing his vehicle into the environment. Two, he's got to park that truck somewhere, and he's got to line up that escape route just right. Line it right up the hill to that back door. And then three, know that there's going to be a 5-year-old, that Summer is going to be in that back door when I get up the hill into that property. Okay. I'm not even going to have to look for her. Unaware. Okay. And also calculating out potentially who's going to be in the environment to see me coming up the hill. Okay. And I mean, you've got mom out there, you've got grandma out there, you've got 3 other boys in that house. Okay. And all of a sudden, this guy's got to get up there in a one-way mirror, i.e. situation. He can't see into the room, but he's got to check that lock. And guess what? The door's open that day. It's open. And when he opens it, either A, he goes in and takes her, or B, she comes out into his arms. And now it's a mad dash down the dog trail to the waiting red truck, okay, and controlling her all the way with mom, potentially within that 2 to 10 minutes, is already back in the house going, where's Summer? Where's Summer? Okay. Where is she? Oh, she went downstairs to play. Go ahead, Gary.
Wouldn't they have had to climb over the couch that was blocking the door?
Well, exactly. That's the other problem.
When you take that couch and analyze the crap out of it for DNA because some offender climbed over it.
Yeah, well, they have to find it.
Well, that's just it. It's mysteriously missing, conveniently missing.
Went MIA.
Yeah. Right, along with whatever happened to this kid. I mean, the other thing is, Chris, that if they went in there and examined it, now we're suspecting that. Look, how do I say this? We can't make an accusation, but logic leads us to conclude that it must be at least entertained that the child was eliminated in the confines of that home. It could be. If that happened, well, if there are no traces of anything, well, what does that say about how she would have met her end? I mean, there's no blood. What does it suggest? Strangled?
There's a variety of things. I mean, she could have a head injury. She could have strangulation.
Right, but no blood. It implies. Now, it might be that whatever they found was so typical in the ambient environment because it was her own home, her own room, maybe, that they wouldn't have made a big fuss out of finding her hair or finding other. But the absence of blood is very interesting. If she is eliminated there, it suggests that she may have been smothered or strangled or something like that. Yeah. So, but if she wasn't eliminated in the home, what on earth are we suggesting? That she was taken off somewhere and into a quiet place and eliminated?
Well, that would be the next logical step, right? Now that you have this, 50-pound bag of, concrete, for lack of a better term, and I don't mean to be insensitive to Summer, but when her spirit left her body, then she's no longer there. It is literally just, a bag of concrete and the offenders never really think about that, right? They think, they do what they do. They don't realize then that, oh, crud, I have to tie a rock on this bag of concrete and throw it in the river, okay, and hold it down. And they don't process that, right, as you know, Gary, because the fantasy of what they're doing,
yes,
okay, is overwhelming for them.
Or they're not particularly bright.
or they're not bright. Right. And so in this situation, we don't know, really what those dynamics are. We just know that this 5-year-old has vanished.
Right.
And the last person to see her, there are 5 people that allegedly saw her: mom, grandma, and the 3 boys. That's the 5, allegedly. Okay. And we have this next myth: somebody's being framed in relationship to
Right.
what else is going on here.
Right. But Chris, just before we move to that, there are so many cases where the person is disappeared, and then there are attempts to eliminate the body, and then they turn up because of the stupidity of the offender. Like, for example, I read of a case once where in a book somewhere where an offender dismembered a victim and didn't realize that if you throw the body parts into the water, the gas in the body associated with decomposition will make the body parts float to the surface.
10 days later.
Right. So these kinds of pieces of information they don't seem to think through. But one of the most typical things when there is a successful disappearance is either burial or total dismemberment, butchery of the person, where they're just sort of scattered all over the place. So that unfortunately, what I think we have to consider is that the child is buried somewhere nearby or has been unfortunately dismembered and eliminated. The other thing is I have always been very drawn to the picture that you guys painted, that it would make a lot of sense if the body was eliminated in the couch. I always thought that was a very clever insight, that the couch is mysteriously taken away, and the kid could just be in there. And then you have every excuse to burn it or whatever. But that complete decimation of the child, I think, is unfortunately what likely happened. And I think that it's probable that more than one person knows that secret, and you have to get one to turn on the other. But Josh, don't you also think that it's very probable that the child is not with us anymore?
Yes. I've thought that for quite some time, probably right around the time that the boys were taken, and
right
after so many days. Now, the couch, it's funny because there are people that say that, I've asked on, he would always say, I'm going to send you a picture of the couch, because, and he'd call me an a-hole and say, what's your problem? What is your obsession with this couch? Well, there was a picture of a couch taken, not a clear one, I couldn't even tell if it was a couch or not. Somebody said, well, that's the couch that you're talking about. And it absolutely is not the couch that I'm talking about. It doesn't look like the couch that I'm talking about. And it's one of those misinformation. Look, I don't doubt that there's a couple couches sitting on that hill somewhere. If you look at it, it looks like a junkyard, but there's no proof that that's the couch that was in front of the door, or anything like that. It doesn't look like that couch to me. Okay. Dawn saying, look, I'll send you a picture of the couch, probably 7 or 8 times to shut me up was his whole point, which he never did. And, like I said, he doesn't owe me anything, but it was his suggestion. So then I just kind of said, well, waiting for that picture. Right. And then I would just get back, you're an a-hole, drop it to this or that. And I said, look, man, and I've even told him this, if there's something that you can give me that would, help you, I'll put that out. I got no problem with that. But there's never been, and he's even said, oh yeah, absolutely. None of that has ever.
That fascinates me, but it's important to understand. I have extensively studied elimination murderers. That's a whole topic that I am extremely fascinated by. And I can tell you that what those people, the whole point is that because you're hiding evidence, what you're going to do is completely and totally eradicate the body. What elimination murderers tend to do is either stage something to look like something happened that didn't, usually stupidly, like in the Murdoch case, right? or where you go, oh, I'm calling 911 because blah blah blah, and it's, you know, you get caught because you can't fake it perfectly, or they completely and totally. I mean, I have seen everything from, like, you know, eliminating the body into very small pieces and putting them in different places, fire, you know, whatever. But the point is that because these people are savvy enough to know that the littlest thing could damn them, they don't want a body found that might have marks on it or indications or whatever. That person has to be totally disappeared, completely disappeared. And so I don't think you're ever going to find a body. I don't believe that there is that one day you're going to find an intact person somewhere. I just don't think so, because it wouldn't be consistent with the typical person who does that. Chris, you understand, it's like these people have a little bit of understanding about DNA and how you can do an autopsy and determine certain things, and they get very clever about, like, a total elimination. I've even seen elimination murder where the remains are fed to animals. That I've also seen that. But the point is, you have to get in your head the idea that if this is an elimination murder, which I think has to be put on the table as a possibility, they're going to behave like a lot of those people who either burn or completely eliminate, or, you know, etc. So that do not ever expect to find a body. I mean, I think that would be the idea. I mean, Chris, wouldn't you think chances are we're never finding these remains? We were never intended to, and we probably never will.
Yeah, I think they've gone to, well,
yes,
right, and I think we have to consider the criminality in relationship to the background of the parties involved, all the parties involved, not just mom and dad, but, you know, the folks that have come around them, you know, and, you know, rah, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. If we look at the circle of influence, then that circle does not look very promising for some.
No, unfortunately it doesn't. And the potential motive that you have to be conceptualizing would be all about total elimination of evidence. Because first it's the idea of no body, no problem. And then there's, you know, dead men tell no tales, you know, and then but then there's also the idea that you can deduce a very great deal from a body. So you have to get rid of it, all of its identifying aspects, etc. This is the problem. You know, I write in my book about this idea of new evil. Well, one of the issues is that as the technology gets better to catch offenders, right? Yeah, right. That the offenders are getting better at completely eliminating evidence. And people like Ann Burgess and Victor Petreka and I at Boston College, we are seeing an increase in crimes where there's total mutilation or burning, etc., of bodies, because people are savvy about what you can detect from and in these elimination murders, that's usually the case. You don't just bury someone. It's all about total elimination of evidence.
Well, a lot of the time when they get people in the interview room, they have to say, hey, you got to take us to the body because we can't find it. It happens I mean, just because somebody is clever enough to get rid of a body doesn't mean that they get away with the crime. I mean, that's the whole thought of the no body prosecution.
Right, no body, no problem. Right. Exactly.
Right. Exactly. So there's been this movement, and like Chris said, there's been a movement to prosecute, to be able to have the option to prosecute no body homicides, but DAs are scared that their reputation could get tarnished if they happen to lose, which is their job is to try to prosecute crimes that are put in front of them. If there's a crime that is put in front of you, and so you're going to tell me that because we can't find the body because somebody did something insidious and disgusting and horrible, we're just going to drop it? I can't.
Well, Chris and Josh, people are saying in the chat that apparently Don is quoted as saying in someplace that she'd never be found.
He said stuff like that. Yeah.
Numerous times.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what would be the reason for saying such a thing?
He says he's lost hope.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Well, all right.
Fear on the resurrection.
But that was like that was just right after she went missing.
That's very interesting. And yeah. Well, but Chris, don't you think that if the motive, which I think we have to contemplate, is trying to hide evidence of something, why would you leave a body intact? That would speak volumes. You obviously, what you would do is you would eliminate the body entirely, so that with the body goes the whole story. It's not enough to get rid of the witness. You have to get rid of all the things that there's the silent witness reveals. So that I think what you have to picture is, this was done, the deed was done, and it was a secret probably between the people who did it. And it's like you got to try to make a rupture between those people to get one of them to rat.
Yeah, I mean, the only time to this theory, right, where Don Wells is being framed.
Oh yes, that's one of my favorite myths in this case.
Yeah, there's no evidence, and the only time he was ever framed was in the office of his parole officer up on the wall. Okay, his picture. Okay, that was the last time he was ever framed. Okay, and right. I mean, but here now he's got a missing 5-year-old daughter. Okay, and he's not lifted a finger to go out and look for her into the environment, nor has the mother. Not one time.
And they say they have, but there is absolutely zero evidence that happened. And I'm telling you, people have kept an eye on this. Yeah. Locals have kept an eye on this.
I mean, most recently, right, Josh? Most recently, he showed up at an event and he couldn't even go inside. Wouldn't go inside. And it was a missing child's. There was several missing children that they were talking about at this church. And Don left early. He did, by the way, he also did this at the very first prayer vigil. They left early. He said, look, there were people that came from other counties for this, right? He shows up and he talks for a few minutes and then says, look, we got to go meet with our private investigators. That was what he said. I don't know whatever happened with that meeting. Maybe they found something out that they never had to search again or whatever it is, but no, they haven't lifted a finger. And for people to suggest that they have is kind of insulting to looking for this missing girl, Summer Wells. I mean, that those PIs, to your point, Josh, those PIs, if they're worth their salt, they'd be out here on the arena here,
right,
and talking about Summer Wells and the investigative steps that they've made, the progress that they've made in her abduction, and talking about it. Because
on the show,
they're welcome to come on the lab, and you're welcome to come on the interview room. I'd love to have you on, whoever you are. I know who you are, but I'd love to have you guys on.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you want to talk about it, it's great, because I've got a ton of questions for you. And, he keeps talking about, this and that and blah, blah, blah. Great. Let's put them out in front and let's get them out here. Same with this other individual, this other, the real estate agent, turned media manager, that guy, the camera, the photographer for, property values.
I can't stand that guy.
Well, all of a sudden he's an expert in everything I know about, child abduction. I've learned off of the internet, right?
He's an expert at twiddling his thumbs.
Well, that said, okay, those are the kind of people that need to be out front. We shouldn't be out front talking about Summer. They should be out front talking about Summer. They're the advocates for Summer, quote unquote. Well, then start advocating. Come on out. Talk about your investigative steps. Talk about the things that you're learning. Okay?
No, what he does is he puts on the official Find Summer Wells Facebook page, right? Endorsed by the family, if that matters to anybody, that he puts his political beliefs on there. He calls YouTube
endorsed by the family.
Yeah. He puts on there that YouTube creators or podcasters have a Putin-esque, feel to them. He says that, it's like Russia or just some hog crap, that he brings up, and he weaponizes that page with her face on it as his own. Like he's speaking for her, saying, your mommy and daddy love you to the boys. Please don't believe these lies. I'll tell you this, Tim, right now, while I have you, let me just say that whatever's being said about Don and Candace, I can guarantee you, I read the reports from the domestic violence incidents. They saw worse than anybody is saying in that house. So for him to sit there on behalf of the parents and say, make these statements, well, he's a pile. Sorry.
There was, as kids, you used to see cereal boxes that would, have prizes on the outside of them, right? And then in this situation, the prize that I'm seeing is, special kaleidoscope glasses inside, okay, endorsed by cosmonauts. I mean, you have this principle of an individual who knows nothing about what we're talking about here tonight. Okay, nothing. And but yet he's endorsing this myth. And by doing that, what ends up problematic for the investigation is what he doesn't realize. He's clogging the wheel. He's creating these false, narratives that create these false leads that come into the investigator and goes, oh gosh, the kaleidoscope glasses are here, and from the cosmonauts. Okay, well, what do they got to say today? All right, you flip open the page and you read the lead that somebody had to take on the phone. Oh, okay, well, click. Oh, look, CPS stole the children. Okay, I mean, honestly, the moment that came out, literally, you could put those kaleidoscope glasses on. I can see him walking around with these glasses going, CPS stole, Summer Wells, as well as Chris McDonough and, Josh and everybody else. And all of that is just carnival talk. It's sideshow talk. It's Barker talk.
Yeah.
Okay? I'll guess your weight for $5.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And that goes to another point here. Mom used to work in carnivals.
That's true.
And so she's familiar with that flow of how things work. Okay. And so that's the other thing. What's the next myth?
Well, the next one and last one is my personal, I wouldn't say favorite, but one that gets brought up ad nauseum. I mean, and so this is kind of a two-parter here. If the parents had something to do with it, it would have came out by now, is the first part. And then the second part is, if the boys knew anything, they would have told by now. So let's just tackle that first part right away. You guys have worked investigations many, many, many a times. Okay. You've done it extensively. And I say that these people that say this, I call them casuals. Okay. They're people that kind of watch Dateline here and there. They like that kind of stuff. They watch interrogations and they think that they know. They're friends with the Wells that say, well, look, it would have been out by now. I can't, that's just absolutely ridiculous, in my opinion. I mean, what say you guys? Seriously, because you guys are the ones that have worked investigations. I mean, is there any truth to that?
I'll take the top one. It already has.
Right. I know what you mean by that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that we're talking about them, okay, that information's out there. I mean, just what we don't know are the details in relationship to what's going on. What happened in those walls, behind those walls at 110 Ben Hill Road? We don't know before, what we call pre-incident behavior, and then incident behavior, and then post-incident behavior. There are 3 stages there. Pre-incident behavior, we know that many children were taken away from this family, the mother specifically. How many children did she lose?
7.
7 children.
7
How
children.
many in this chat, show me in this chat, have lost 7 children, have had 7 children taken away from you? Now, I don't expect you to obviously put it up there, but honestly, how many of you know somebody that had 7 children taken away from them by the state? Okay. Right. That's going to speak for itself. Right. So you have 7 children taken away from a family. Okay. And then you have, that's the mother side. And then you have the grandmother who is missing a daughter. She just vanished, which is the mother's sister. Okay. And so how many folks in the chat now have had who know somebody who 2 family members have just vanished without a trace?
I think Job lost 10 children.
Job. Yes. Great point, Gary. Job.
I think that's the only person I could think of.
Yeah, Job.
Job lost 10 children, right?
He had more than that happened to him, but yeah, at least.
Right, a lot worse than that. But he had like seven boys and 3 girls, and
He lost grandchildren too.
He lost all. Right, he lost 10. But
we're at double zeros right now.
Like the worst story.
Job, I don't know. Right.
So, and now we look at the, and this is just pre-incident behavior.
Job.
This is just pre-incident. We're not even at incident behavior yet. Okay. But pre-incident behavior, now we look at the circle of influence. Okay. And let's shift now and do the genealogy tree on dad. Okay. Well, the son to dad is a registered RSO.
No question about it. Signed, sealed, and delivered.
Signed, sealed, and delivered.
Yep.
All right.
No mistaking it.
The dad has done 3 stints in prison, state prison. Okay.
We call that the hat trick.
The hat trick. Okay. And so now you have to, this is just pre-incident. We're not even at the incident yet. Okay. This is what Summer was born into. She was brought into this environment. She did not get a chance to select her environment. Nobody does. But this little baby for 5 years lived in an environment with some of those dynamics. And this is just, the tip of the iceberg. We haven't even hit the iceberg yet. Okay. We're just talking about some of the pre-incident behaviors. If we take into account grandma and her brother, that guy and all of those circles, and then we take into account all of the people that were coming to that property, who was up on that property, and that we don't even know. We know that Don has said, oh yeah, there's drugs all over the place here. And in fact, some of the people that he alleged abducted his daughter in the very first day, he said they were drug addicts. Okay. Does that mean they had access to the property? Does that mean these are the kind of influences around him that, all of a sudden, these aren't the church people. Okay. Miss Robin was at the church. Okay. All these other people were at the church. They weren't hanging out at 110 Ben Hill Road. Okay. And we don't even know about all the police reports yet in totality. How many times did they respond up there on DV? And how many of those officers that witnessed some of those conditions wrote a report which generated CPS's involvement? Hey, while up on a domestic on 110 Ben Hill Road, I got to tell you, okay, blah, blah, blah. I saw this. You may want to do a welfare check. Okay. I opened the fridge and saw there was enough food, so I really couldn't do anything that night. but you guys may want to follow up. Okay. Now that's just dealing with the top question. And I haven't even gotten to the incident behavior yet. Okay. The incident behavior is 5-year-olds don't evaporate from their property. Okay. So what do the boys know? Dr. Brucato, what are your thoughts?
It just doesn't happen. I mean, it's illogical. I mean, I agree with you 100%. I just think that no matter how you slice it, a logical person making very simple deductions and considering statistics and probabilities cannot avoid the conclusion that you cannot take the family out of the circle, no matter how hard you try. And but I do not believe this whole idea that if the parents had something to do with it, would have come out by now. I think it's more like if you don't have a body, you may have to keep people on a kind of leash without them knowing it, and keep an eye on them until somebody screws up or says something incriminating. But it's very hard for me to believe that they've been taken out of the circle and are not being looked at. I mean, Josh, don't you also think that it's very probable that law enforcement is constantly keeping an eye on those two? Or do you think that after enough time they said, that's, I mean,
no, I think that they do keep it.
Right. So they're keeping them on a long leash or something like, like that kind of thing. Sometimes that's what you do. You give people enough rope to hang themselves, but they've got to screw up. If you don't have a body, you wait until something else comes up. Now, this leads me actually to something I wanted to talk about with you that actually sparked this entire conversation about myths. I reached out to you, Josh, and I told you that I had heard in the media some story about Candace getting caught on a phone call saying something incriminating, and you said to me, that's a little bit of a myth. And then that led me to start wondering about all the other myths. What's up with that story?
Okay, so the story was put out by another channel, and in the title of it, it said that Candace says there's something along the lines that Candace says that Dawn is going to jail. Well, in that phone call, Candace agreed that if Dawn keeps letting people, i.e. me, Chris, specifically, getting to him, he's going to end up going to jail. It had absolutely nothing to do with Summer going missing. And I mean, it was a clickbait situation, no doubt about it.
So it was what's the word we're looking for? It was a kind of a mischaracterization.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of accidental or otherwise, of a statement. But that's the kind of thing that puts information out there that really is a problem, because there are a lot of people who will insist that happened. And it's
there are also people that do cliffhangers too. Like they'll just say very coded things and kind of just leave everybody hanging. And typically it never, 99% of the time, it never goes anywhere. So like you'll just hear like, oh, I had a really good conversation with Hawkins County, and then zap, nothing.
Right.
And you're going, well, what's the point of doing that? To get a rise? I mean, are you trying to get Dawn and Candace scared? I don't know. I don't know what good that does other than entice people. Like this isn't Grey's Anatomy. We don't need cliffhangers and stuff. This isn't this isn't a soap opera that's on TV. And so a lot of people do it. Especially on YouTube, not just in true crime, but just in general.
Right.
There's a lot of clickbait.
Well, Chris, do you agree with the supposition that they probably haven't closed the circle on these two, and that they're just basically keeping an eye on them?
Yeah, I don't think they've shut the door at all. I think my fear is, and this is just my own opinion, is that Pruitt has gone back to his caseload, because he said it. He said it to Josh. I mean, Josh talked to him. He said it on a news clip that they're not getting as many leads as they used to. And so he checks his summer box, for lack of a better term, flushes it, finds out what he can chase, what he can't chase, and then, he goes back to his daily caseload. And so my thinking has always been at this point, 3 years into it, they need to pass that baton to an agency like TBI where they have so many more resources. And the sheriff's department just needs to let go and or give Pruitt more people and let him go, i.e. leave him locked into his room, in his war room, and let him chase Summer Wells till it's done. But they don't have the resources for that, and understandably so. And if we think about, this second question again, if the boys knew anything, they would have already told by now. All right, well, let's take a look at some of those dynamics with, continuing with inside of that family. Okay. Pre-incident behavior. How many photographs are floating online where all of the children are at the job site with Don? Okay. That's not by accident. Okay. Those are control mechanisms. Okay. That father controlled every thought process moving right up to the day where he's holding that boy as close as he can. And his son's down, he's looking down and out. Okay. And dad is pulling him in as he's talking on that news piece. Okay. Then you have, well, first of all, and a lot of people that have never paid attention to the fact that why are these three kids at a construction site doing drywall with their father? Okay. Or I don't know when the dates were. Maybe it was the summer. Okay. But quite frankly, if OSHA came by, they would have said, why are these kids here? Number one. Okay. And because that's a control mechanism from the family, from the father and the mother. Everybody's doing drywall that day and a couple of those days in between. Well, they're not being kids then. They're not kids. Kids don't have jobs. Not like that. That is more of the attitude of, okay, let's all get in the camper. We're going to the next town. And that's what mom knows. And dad knows that. Grandmother knows that. Grandma was a carny as well. Okay. It's not unusual for the whole family to do that. It's not like you're milking cows on a farm. Okay. You're actually pulling kids into a construction site, which, they wear hard hats on those things for reasons. Okay. But for the Wells family, it's okay. Let's take a picture. We're all here working. Okay. We're good to go.
Maybe Don wanted to join the circus and be the caboose in the flying Wells trapeze.
Anything's possible. Okay. Anything is possible. And then we fast forward that to the day of. Let's real fast. Let's talk about the day of the incident behavior. Okay. Well, those three boys are left at the house by themselves, or according to some statements, they went to work with Don. Either way, those three children are at the house by themselves while mom allegedly is away with Summer, with grandma. And they went fishing and or the water hole. Okay. So you see that piece of the puzzle right there is problematic. Day of the incident. Why are these three boys home? And then you have this crossover of statements, this crossover where, well, they weren't really home. They were with Don at work, because remember, Hunter says the boys were with Don at work.
Right.
Okay. Mom says, no, they were home. I was with Hunter. But then we have Hunter saying that Candace came over and said, what did you tell the cops? What did you say? Okay. Why is that behavior, being overlooked? Okay. The cops haven't overlooked it. I can guarantee you. I can guarantee you. When I sat down with Hunter and I asked him, I said, "Hey, have you already interviewed with the PD?" He goes, "Yes, and the FBI 3 times." I said, "Okay, so they've already asked you all these questions." "Yeah." "Okay. Don't tell me anything you have not told them. Do you understand me?" He goes, "Yes." I said, "Okay, I don't want to know." Okay. I.e. that phase of that, prior to turning the camera on. Okay. And remember, they came back and accused me of saying some stuff, and that's why I put the unedited version out there.
Right.
Okay, to shut it down. It's like, enough. But that day, if those 3 boys were home by themselves, hypothetically, or is that just part of the the script? Okay. I don't know. But I do have a sense that those boys have been interviewed extensively by forensic psychologists like Dr. Brucato.
Yeah.
Child psychologist. Wouldn't you say, Gary?
I mean, I think given how long it's been and the fact that they haven't been returned, I mean, chances are, of certainly children can be very protective of their parents. They can, but what tends to happen is when you have multiple kids, the story can't be kept straight. If they're isolated from each other, they say things that don't match up. They, one tells a little bit more, then it's obvious the other one is covering. In other words, you get a sort of tangled web when you're dealing with multiple children. And I have no doubt that the giveaway is that they weren't returned. So I mean, it's not like nothing was founded. I mean, it suggests that there was an investigation of the place showed it wasn't exactly a suitable environment, right?
Well, they absolutely could have been. They could have told everything that they know by now, but it's not public information. And
Right.
and that look, you save that kind of information for when you go to a trial. Now, do they put children on trial, or do they put children on the stand? Yes, they absolutely do. And if they witnessed anything, they could potentially 5 years from now testify. There is no statute of limitations on a murder case. So say the elimination murder or the elimination murder theory that you have coined, and
it seems that we all think is worth considering.
Absolutely, I do. So maybe there's no hurry. Maybe they're, psychologically what those children went through was traumatizing. It absolutely is. No matter what, even if they didn't say they didn't see anything, living in that house, being ripped out of your house, no matter how horrific the circumstances are, that's the only home they ever knew. That's the only lifestyle they ever knew. And according to Candace and Dawn, that the boys all have said, do not send us back. We don't want to go back, because they found out what life is like outside of the hill. And they have obviously realized that wasn't the way to live. No offense to Dawn and Candace. They can get mad at this. They can be upset. That's just a fact, is that those kids don't want to go back. I heard it from Dawn and Candace myself on this very show. Dawn told me, and he at the time seemed kind of at peace with it, going, look, they're playing football, they're going to school, blah, 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 blah. And I said, look, that's admire, I admire your take on that, because you want the best for your children, but they don't want to go back. That tells me a lot.
But Josh, there's one thing that, and you're going to know the answer to this because you know the case intimately, both of you, that bugs me about this, is that if you had a repetitious process of different things happening to the different kids, why is this the only one, at least in theory, that is killed? In other words, what's different about, was this kid, for example, the most special victim, favored in some way by a person? Is it because the person had a favoritism for girls, that they liked girls as a victim? Was there some very particular abuse where there would have been marks or things only because of that just happened to be the time at which somebody might be looking, and that's in other words, I don't understand. Was it that she was favored in some way by a person who had a pattern with different children, which would have been sexualized, for example, let's say, could have been more sexualized as opposed to just neglect or physical abuse? I mean, is that the suggestion, that there could have been that kind of focus? I mean, I don't know, all speculation, but there must have been something different in the dynamic with that child, that particular child, if this is an elimination murder, because it didn't happen to the other kids. So Chris, do you have I mean, do you see why that's an interesting point?
Oh, I think it's go ahead, Josh. Say what you were going to say.
I think it's because it was a girl, a young girl.
So the sexualized component?
Definitely.
I've heard stories, and I didn't know if they were myths, because as I said, I don't know the truth from fiction at this point. But I've read, for example, things online like that he was sleeping with her naked for years. Is that true?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, and if you think about the last time he describes it, is I can still feel her touch against my skin.
Oh, I see. How deeply disturbing.
And what's also interesting, what we would call in a narrative control, is remember the phone call to Dawn or you got Hunter in the car. Dawn makes a phone call and says, look, there's somebody up on the property, with the kids, touching the kids, i.e. the boys. Because the 3 boys are up there by themselves, allegedly. Okay. Well, that means one of those 3 boys had to call Dawn and say, hey, somebody's up here trying to touch us. Okay. It's interesting that it is SA in nature, that particular phone call in of itself. And this is the first time I'm putting this card on the table for people. I've not said this in 3 years. Okay. I'm saying it tonight on the lab. Okay. That phone call was about, an SA problem. And it involved the boys, allegedly. There's somebody up on the property trying to touch the kids, i.e. the boys.
I see.
Okay. But the girl, isolation, right, Gary? The girl is isolated with mom, allegedly. Okay. So it's almost this curveball inside of the narrative. Okay. You have to have somebody up on the property doing an essay to justify the disappearance of the victim. Okay. And that just happened to be a convenient story that just kind of floated out there, but it's people haven't really caught it, and I a long time ago I caught it. Anyway, that enough said.
That is a myth, Chris. Who put that one out there?
He did.
Well, that's the point I was trying to make at the beginning of this thing. Right. I mean, one thing to have a problem at one end of a mystery where the public is screwing it up and the reporters are screwing it up, but what happens when it seems that some of the myths are coming out of the people that are the principal players? Yeah. Well, then you have to ask yourself, what on earth is the reason for that? Well, I mean, it's an extended act of a cover story. So obviously, all speculation. We cannot say any of this in an official way because there's been no formal accusation. But I think doing the thought experiment we did today does lead to some eye-opening ideas. But the reason what I was getting at with my question is I cannot reason myself into any conclusion other than that there was a special dynamic with that particular child.
Well, Don says that. He says that I was her favorite. She was my favorite. There was a man that lived at the house that he's no longer with us, but Chris and I interviewed him on the interview room. His name was Jose, and his account was very telling, and I personally believed most everything that he said. It sounded reasonable, at least. But he claims that he saw Dawn showering with Summer, and that he objected to it, which caused a riff, and there was a fight ensued because of it. So, this isn't just, look, do I have proof of that? The only proof that I would have is from him saying that. Okay.
I hear so.
But I believe Don has also said himself that that's happened as well. Matter of fact, Candace, the wife, went as far as to show herself as a child taking a bath with her father, claiming that he was wearing skin-colored shorts or whatever. He looked naked to me, and that it's not that big of a deal. Well, I'm here to tell you, it is. You don't do that. I don't care if that's your daughter or not. 5 years old?
Right.
That's inappropriate.
Right. And there's another element to this for those of us. I mean, Chris and I have both encountered a lot of cases of abuses of children and so forth in our respective work. And one of the things I'm always very interested in is that if an accusation is made about a person who simply wouldn't do something like that, the people around them leap to their defense and say, I would never in a million years have pictured this person doing something like that. But what it looks like is that the people around this household don't seem too shocked or horrified. You don't get anybody who's going, he never did anything like that before. What are you talking about? Hair on fire, right? That don't you, in fact, don't you even have people in the wider family that kind of go like, yeah, that would be consistent with some of the stuff that went on. I mean, Chris, hasn't that been your experience too? That if there's no smoke, there's no fun. Usually people over the years have encountered you, and there's always going to be a story or two that creeped someone out. They walked in on you looking at some particularly horrendous pornography. They glimpsed something on your phone. They saw you, they walked in on you with your hand, on a child in a way that was a little weird. There's always that kind of thing. And I just, that has bothered me about this, is that you don't have people leaping in and going, no way, totally out of character. I mean, Chris, what are your thoughts on that, about how you don't seem to have character witnesses here to speak to the sterling quality of the accused? Or not really formally accused, but you know what I mean.
I think what we hear in this case are conditional responses, right, Gary? And
right.
What we have, if we just kind of talk about the boys again real fast, right, to your point, you have the three allegedly at home or at work, either way. They have to be at home, though, if Don's statement of the touching thing is legit. Okay. And what's interesting about that, just going a little bit deeper into that thought process, immediately you have the mother, okay, who, when she gets home, rather than going to the boys and saying, hey, who was up here touching you or trying to touch you? Okay. It's almost like this conditional narrative that's presenting itself immediately. Okay. Instead, she is shifting the conversation to Summer, who has vanished or is about to vanish. Okay. It's almost like she's trying to melt, the cheese on top of the cheeseburger.
Oh, I get it. Yeah, right.
Are you tracking me?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. And so all of a sudden now, the narrative of, hey, this stranger up on the property, that narrative conversation has been set, okay, by Dawn. And now you have Mom, who says, yes, the boys were inside of the house playing video games, watching TV, etc. And Summer wanted to go into the house to play, but we were outside, with grandma and the mint and all that other stuff, right? Doing the flower pot, etc. But for some reason, she adds into the narrative, but I walked her back over as if she's, mom of the year, walking her baby, 10 feet, 15 feet at the most, okay, into the house. And she tells the boys, you keep an eye on Summer. Okay. Let me know, keep an eye on Summer, instead of saying, and tell me about this guy that was poking around the property here before I got home. I want to know about that guy. Who was that guy? Where is that guy? Why is that guy up here on the property? Who, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, boys who just called dad, allegedly, hey, there's some creep up here trying to touch us. Okay. Mom has no conversation about that guy. He just...
That's like, when you just said that, my mind went, who doesn't call the cops when something like that happens? And then they go home and they have a picnic and plant flowers and eat peppermint. Like, I never even put that together, but even that makes everything even worse.
And you would keep a special eye on the kids because you'd be scared that there was a lurking pervert.
And is he in the basement? Is he in the basement? You see the pervert. He has to be in the myth. He has to be in the myth.
Damn.
And so he's in the basement allegedly now somehow. If it's not him, it's got to be, okay, we got to create another narrative that kind of works. And that's the guy in the truck who comes up the dog trail and snatches her and takes her down. Because
so this property is just absolutely riddled with perverts from every direction. I mean, that's a whole... we need a term for that. You know how there's like a school of fish and a barrel of monkeys and a screen of trees, like a pod of whales.
I think you nailed it the last time.
We need
lions, tigers, snakes, and pervs.
Oh my!
Yeah, there needs to be a term for this mythical group of perverts. I don't even want a lurk of perverts or something. So there's this whole group of them that are around, right? Okay, I mean, this is preposterous. I mean, Chris, wouldn't you overdo it with security and protection if you thought anything like this was going on?
Well, not only that, Doctor, is that when Summer goes missing, she sends her 3 unattended boys to look for them, to look for her, while saying somebody...
Incident behavior. Right, Josh? I mean, that's a great point. I forgot about that. She sends the boys out. Where's Summer? I don't know, Mom. She's not here. Summer, are you down there? And she goes down in the basement. Okay. She's just, when she's just like, she's gone. She's just gone.
She's gone.
Okay. And then what happened?
Preposterous story.
And then what I did was I sent my boys out into the same environment where this person's lurking allegedly before I got home, and who may have just taken Summer. Well, you guys go out there and see if you can find the pervert and let us know if he has Summer. What if they would have run into the stranger with Summer? Okay, hypothetically, right? We just know it. DLR does not look right. It doesn't even sound right. DSR. Okay. And so this is why in the very, for all this whole time we've all been, thinking through this stuff, I said in the very beginning, I said, don't leave the house. Whatever you do, don't leave the house. And when I was there, I wanted to see that room. And I wanted to talk to Don. I had a chance to talk to Candace. And then I had a chance to talk to Robin, Miss Robin. She is an interesting character as well. She's in the church. Okay. And now there's a lot of myths floating around that somehow the church is involved in taking, Summer and placing her into a protective environment that, everybody's running around with, Wonder Woman, pajamas on with capes, and we've done a good thing from our church. We've got an adoption program and all this other stuff. Okay. Well, don't you think you should tell the FBI that you have Summer? I mean, here's a call coming in. Okay. If anybody, and I'll make a quick message here tonight, a public service announcement. If you have Summer Wells, okay, you're about ready to go to prison.
Yeah. For a really long time.
For a very long time. Okay. So this is one of these things that's a myth. Stop with that. Because Miss Robin, quite frankly, told me. And
interesting.
And she told me, quite frankly, when she got there that night, she knew something was wrong with that family. And she told me straight up. I asked her straight up, and it's, tell me what your problem is here with them. She goes, there's something wrong.
Right. And when the interview that you had with her was going to come out, she says, I don't know what he's going to play, but I want, basically trying to get ahead of it. That wasn't played at the time. Robin said to Chris that there's something up. It's just, it doesn't make any sense. She feels that way too. She told you that.
Yeah.
To your thing. But then supports the Wells currently, which I find odd as well.
Well, it's okay. I mean, Robin's a good person. She's not a bad person. She's just confused, but she knows what the truth is.
Absolutely.
Even her own heart told her in the very beginning of this whole thing, there's something's not right in River City here.
Mm-hmm.
And, the fact that she, picked up the trombone and started, playing it around town, and everybody saw her coming down the hill. Okay. Coming down the hill, wah, 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 you going, playing the trombone. This is why she got so nervous when I played her interview.
Yeah, exactly. Because she didn't know what, right, exactly. I remember she put that video out, and everybody's going, what the hell's that?
Yeah, she tried to get out in front of me, but you notice I ignored it.
Okay, and nothing on there. Right. Nothing on there. It's like it kind of made her look kind of foolish for coming out and saying, I don't know what he's going to play or what was said. This interview was a long time ago. And then it was just like, Chris never implicated that she had said to him, yeah, there's something's not right. There's something going on here.
Right. And I gave her my word. I wouldn't tell her everybody everything. And I haven't. And I'm still not going to.
There's still more. Right. Exactly.
Oh, there's a lot more. Yeah. But we just, the goal here is, 5-year-olds don't vanish.
Let me get to a couple of these super chat questions here really quick. And then we'll wrap it up here. Chris, is it believable that grandma walked to the pond after leaving the hospital? Now that it's gone back and forth, did grandma, aka Grandis, which is Candace's mother, was she there? And she was having a knee problem. Okay. So that's where this question is. I mean, is it believable? Do you believe that, Chris? I know that we're asking you to speculate.
Well, I asked that same question to her, remember? When I was walking down to the pond to the path, I said, how is your mother doing this? How was she walking this thing?
Right.
And Candace just kind of fired off, well, blah, 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 real quick. But that's also part, and Gary, you'll find this interesting.
I find it also interesting.
Right. But while she's walking to the pond, she just spontaneously says, everything's in slow motion. And I thought, just like you, I went, And you'll see me, I put my hand back to keep Karen back so that she doesn't not Karen, but so that Candace doesn't, think there's more going on here. I wanted her to feel comfortable. And she just spontaneously blasted out, as she's walking towards the the path, she goes, everything is slowing down here. Like she's getting tunnel vision, right? Trauma.
She feels like God's punishing her.
Well, that was the other side, right? When we finally got there.
Yeah, that was that. I always found that very interesting. Has Hunter ever been asked why he wasn't sitting on something to keep his seat dry in the truck after clearly being wet from the swimming hole? I don't know the answer to that. I just don't.
Remember Candace said at first that Summer was sitting on a pillow.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember that because
the pillow
grandmother would get upset. Grandma would get upset if her truck got wet. I've wondered since the beginning whether the boys substantiated that Summer actually came in and went to the house. The answer to that is we don't know. There has been nothing to link, the stories, just because of just a lot of it's just a lot of holes still to be filled. We had a swing like Summers, and it was so scary. If we pushed the wrong way, it would come back at an angle and slam into the tree if we didn't catch it. I always found that swing that she sat on to be dangerous looking myself. But, I would agree with you.
And that was one of my thoughts too, Organized. And that's a great shot of you and your sweetheart. That's a good picture.
Chris, how can Summer get a task force formed?
Great question.
It really is.
Too. I don't know.
And happy birthday, Dr. Gary.
Yes.
PJ's World, what are the chances they actually sold her, and is that solvable? Are we going to be looking for her in this circus 20 years from now? Feels hopeless. Dr. Gary?
I think that that's extremely improbable. The circus, that takes it to the even more absurd, but no, I think the most likely supposition is that the child is not with us anymore. There are children who are sold for sexual purposes, and sometimes they can decades later turn up, but that is very unusual. Chris, wouldn't you say, based on your experience, certainly on mine, the most likely outcome is that the child is not here anymore?
Yeah. Sadly. There's always a small percentage, and you never want to we don't take that off the table. Right. And, it would be a miracle that God allowed that to happen.
Right. And it would be wonderful to be wrong. But Chris, I don't believe she's in the circus. No. If she were sold, it would be
I think she might have been just suggesting that this is a circus, the case itself.
Well, I don't know if they meant it literally or figuratively.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Right. But the idea is that either way, my sense is that if the child was sold, they would be involved in some trafficking kind of situation to perverts, all over the place. But I think it's far more likely that she's not with us, and I think it's very rapidly eliminated. Yeah.
Chris, Candace brings up. Go ahead.
No, Chris was going to say something. What were you going to?
I think he's probably getting yelled at by.
No, actually, I'm being asked if I want a Sonic Blast by my son. Do I have a great son or what? He's going to Sonic. Yes. Okay. Yes.
You're trying to pretend you live
in my boy. Go ahead. What a good guy.
Sonic Blast.
Sorry, I can't get you guys one, but I'll have to feed it to you through the internet.
Yeah.
This is an interesting comment.
Very much is so. Candace brings up washing her and Summer's hands more than once. I think she buried her and was using the repotting story for an excuse for dirt on her or under her nails, and maybe in the sink. Look, that's an interesting thought. Obviously, speculation, but it's possible. Absolutely. That's not crazy speculation. I don't think.
Who knows? Are we giving them credit for intelligence and creativity that may not be there?
No, I'm not. But yeah, I don't think that that's another thing that, which kind of goes along the lines of
Right.
the whole, it's just, it would have came out by now and all that kind of stuff. I don't, people say they're not smart enough to get away with this. I've said this before. I'll say it again. It doesn't take an Einstein to hide a body. There was a case of 2 girls many years ago. I forget the name. These 2 girls beat their friend to death. They drove her up into the mountains and buried her. After all the evidence was pointing to her, and then all the searches and the girls even helped search for their friend, they came up with nothing. 8 months later, when one confessed, they had to lead detectives up the road. She was just off the side of the road under some shrubs where nobody would ever go, nobody would ever look. And you can't tell me if they would have, she confessed, but if she would have never confessed, they would have never found that body, in my personal opinion, because they looked extremely hard. And you can't tell me that 2 17-year-old girls are criminal masterminds. It's just not true. Okay. Because they broke down and admitted what they did eventually, because they're not hardened criminals, if that makes any sense. I mean,
the way I look at this one, I have faith that God will open a window, and that breeze will be felt by somebody. And then that somebody's going to call and said, "Hey, I found something, not sure what it is." And say yes to something. Thanks, Lulu. Exactly. When life gives you Lulu, love it.
And we've been keeping Lulu in our thoughts. She's a wonderful mod of ours, and she lost her brother just recently to a heart attack.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So we're keeping you in our thoughts and prayers, and yeah, just such very young, 40, just in his 40s, very sad. Okay, can the public get together and sign for Ronnie Lawson to let the case go to get it solved? I mean, that's a great question. I don't know. Can you?
I mean, you can always petition for anything. The probability of that, it may not be as strong as he's an elected official. And if, politicians like to make sure they have their jobs unless they're getting close to, resigning. So if he's getting close to resigning and a new sheriff is going to run, put pressure on the new sheriff to do something about Summer Wells' case.
Yeah, I mean, that you can vote him out. If you don't like the job that they do. I do understand that he's run uncontested a few different times. So I mean, it would take the right person, but it's their case. It's his case, and
I have to be honest with you. I don't think he's done anything crazy here. I know there's a lot of conspiracies and all this other stuff. I don't see that, personally. What I see is, yeah, he had a screwed up son. I think he knows that. I think he dealt with it, unfortunately. But I don't think that played into Summer's case. That's just my personal opinion. I could be, totally in left field. But I think Pruitt needs help. And the Cold Case Foundation would love to step in and help, not, move the situation into a different direction if possible.
There's a chance that Summer found some of Candace's drugs if she actually went into the house, and it's a volcanic area, so probably plenty of holes she could have been dumped in. As terrible of a thought as that is, yeah, I mean, you hear about, caves and mines and all kinds of, different things. And if you know the air, that's when I say it doesn't take a genius to get rid of a body. It just doesn't. I get tired of hearing that, because it's criminals are criminals. Don is a hardened criminal he will not crack until, I mean, I just don't think that, I think that Candace would be the one. Don Don's a tough cookie, man. I mean, Chris, you've spoken with him at length. I've spoken with him. He's a real SOB sometimes when it just comes to just chatting with him. He's not the nicest dude in the world. So he's not the soft touch that, oh, well, he'd break. Nah. I've had him break down once or twice. But he was absolutely, just ossified at the time. So yeah. But and that's another thing. Is like, well, they get on there, they get drunk and they don't confess. Like, I don't think that people understand exactly who we're dealing with. That's just my personal, the people that think that, at least. I know there's a lot of people that do understand that aspect of it, but I don't think the people that feel that way, I think that they're just, it's a bit of naive thinking. No offense to people that think that. I know Don sort of, and it's just not in him. It's not in. He's not the kind that's going to roll. He's the kind that puts together stories, quarterbacks it, and carries it out. And this wouldn't be the first time that he's, been in trouble. We've all heard him get interviewed by a detective before, and that was just ridiculous as well. I mean, he's just not like I said, he's just not a nice guy sometimes. So that, don't give them credit.
Don does a lot of multiplying. He hears a story and then he multiplies. He can, if you want to see a good liar, they embrace the lie. If somebody says, something about, whatever, just watch a politician. Okay. A good politician is a great liar. And what they do is, they tell you right to your face. Okay. And what Dr. Brucato was talking about earlier, you tell a lie long enough, and eventually statistically they go, hey, that must be the truth. Okay? But a really good liar is somebody who's doing something, and then they say, I've seen somebody do this like this. Okay. I can't tell you how many times I've sat in a room with people and they say, they ask you a question, right? A good liar asks you a question. So what do you think happened? And, a great response for that is, I'm not sure. What are you thinking? Right?
Chris, you got to tell Dr. Gary really fast.
Yeah.
When you ask Don what should happen to whoever took Summer. I mean, that was one of the most telling things. This goes all the way back. I'll just tell you, his response was that he doesn't wish prison on anybody. Something along those lines, right, Chris?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, man. I've been to prison before, and it's part of the Reed technique, and he failed it, like probably worse than most people would. It was just your typical, well, I don't know
typical way a parent would respond if their child was taken. No. Have you ever actually talked to a parent who had a kid taken from them?
Yes.
If they could, they would mutilate the person with their bare hands. It doesn't matter how spiritual they are. They can't help themselves. I've had situations where people say it's going to take every fiber of my being not to leap out of the chair in the courtroom and kill him with my bare hands. I mean, Chris, you know what I'm talking about. That makes no sense. They don't want the person. Sometimes they don't want the person in jail. They want them like gibbeted and drawn and quartered or tortured or something, because you're talking about their baby. I mean, it's just completely illogical. I mean, anybody in this audience would tell you that. Can you imagine somebody going, oh, I have some, I wouldn't want them to go to jail.
Yeah.
I mean, that's odd. That's almost like an over-identification with the offender.
Well,
he
also said that when they switched to him on one of his interviews, he goes, well, I don't know. It seems kind of elusive. I think that maybe should come forward and clear it up. Like he took some pencils by accident. Like, it's the stupidest. Come and clear it up. Ooh. Just that kind of stuff just drives me nuts.
But somebody says in the chat here, the father has admitted if he gets one more felony, he automatically gets 25 years in prison. According to Tennessee law, any child under 8 that is neglected is a felony. Now if that's true, that's a motive for elimination if I've ever heard one.
Sure. 3 strikes law.
Well, I think that is extremely intriguing to me, to explain what the point would be of needing to eliminate, because I guess you would say, let's take a chance that if there's no kid, that and nothing's going to happen. I could maintain freedom. The maintaining of freedom is a very common reason for elimination murder.
Yeah, right.
And that's extremely interesting to me. I'm going to dog ear that point because, Chris, it didn't occur to me that what he might be aware, if he's involved in some way, he might be aware of what the legal repercussions would be in this case that would be different than in the prior cases, which would answer my earlier question of what's so special about this kid. Well, it might be that this would have been the 3rd strike or something like that.
Well, and that's why he was so vicious going after his sisters,
his
stepsisters.
I think that's an excellent point that was raised by the person. That's really interesting, because I think that starts to account for a lot of the question marks that have been hanging over this for me. I mean, Josh, don't you think? I mean, that would be a very simple, straightforward reason for eliminating.
Absolutely. And I've always felt by the behavior of the parents that their freedom is more important than their finding their child. And that's just how it's always come off to me. Their responses indicate to me that they're just not telling the truth and that they have no intention of telling the truth. This plausible deniability, there's a case going on right now where a little boy is missing. And I haven't been following it, so I don't want to say his name, and because I don't want to mess it up. But the parents, they have not found the child, and they have arrested the parents for neglect. Okay, they're still searching for the child. The parents are have been charged and jailed, and you have to wonder why the same thing didn't happen here. And I think it's because they went with the story that gives them the least amount of responsibility. Somebody came into our house and took her. You can't get me for that. You can't. Somebody took my child from my house. How dare you? Kind of situation. Instead of saying, well, she probably wandered off because I wasn't watching her. I was drunk, or I was doing this or that, because there is some legal ramifications there. But if you say, well, she didn't, or somebody just came into our house and took her, you can't put me in jail for that, can you? Only if you find out I'm lying.
Right. But the problem is there are holes in the story that do raise the question of credibility. And that's the whole thing. See, the one other thing that bugs me about this case, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but if local law enforcement really thought that there was a pervert going around doing this, there would be they'd still be searching for this pervert, yes, knowing that the pervert was looking for his next victim. I mean, you wouldn't just be like, oh, well, let's call that. They must know there's no pervert. So if they know there's no pervert out there doing that, well, what do you think they've concluded? I mean, don't you suspect that behind closed doors they've said, damn, this guy's going to get away with this, but something's very fishy about that.
Yeah,
so it makes more sense. Right. So it makes more sense that they have their eye on the situation. And that's the other thing, is that it would take a very foolish, cocky person to think that they were walking around not under the eye of, and that may be the whole point. Give someone enough rope to hang himself.
Well, and that's where you get
right.
You charge them with felony child abuse, and now you have that 25 third strike, and you pit him.
Yeah, you go for
you pit him in the system,
right?
And then you get the DA and you come to him and you say, okay, let's talk. Where's Summer? And we'll talk to your talk to the system here, and you make a deal.
Yeah,
I agree.
But for her, and I mean, it's not rocket science at this point. You know, I mean, if they own him on the child abuse stuff, then, and he's worried about that third strike, make it happen.
Yeah. One more, and then we will wrap this up here. I appreciate your guys' time again. Well, here we go. I totally thank you guys for standing up for victims.
Yeah.
God bless you, all three of you. And I just would like to say thank you guys so much for your time, expertise, and the audience absolutely appreciates it too. So anything, Dr. Gary, tell us where we can find your, and you're working on a new book as well. Tell us where we can find your book and where people can. I get a lot of comments. I just got Dr. Gary's book, and I need to. So the one that I have coming, I have to send it to you because I would like you to sign it for me.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and so the new evil. Can you tell us a little bit about that and where it can be found?
Well, the new evil was a follow-up to a book that was done by the co-author Michael Stone called The Anatomy of Evil, where he probed the how evil as a construct could be incorporated into psychiatric thinking, forensic thinking, because there clearly were some cases that left people with such a knot in their stomach that they seemed to go beyond what it is that was necessary for the commission of a crime, and to play out fantasies and perversions and cruelties that really suggested there was something a little more there. In fact, the word evil comes from the Germanic ubu, which means beyond, right? Implying that evil is in that extra that goes beyond just committing a crime. And so what he proposed in that book, and then became the basis for a show, Most Evil, on Investigation Discovery, was that you might even be able to quantify on a scale, how bad an action can get beyond the pale, all the way up to torture murder, repeat torture murder, severe torture murder. And what happened is I got, he sort of picked me to co-write the follow-up book, and we revamped, I kind of revamped with him what was included in the scale and conceptualized the categories more as profiles that could be used to categorize criminals, so that you could almost predict things about an offender who was like the other people in the same bucket on the scale. And so the first part of the book, which I wrote alone with some edits from Michael, was really all about that scale with case studies and how to tease apart different types of people on the scale with insights about different offenses that fall into the categories. And then in the second half of the book, what Michael does is he talks about this construct that we came up with, which is new evil, which is the idea that there are some offenses that simply didn't happen prior to recent decades because you didn't have the technology to commit them, right? Like when China Arnold became the first person to kill a child in a microwave. That was because there was a microwave for the first time, right? So you use the technology in a perverse way, the same way that everything gets sexualized as soon as it's invented. Someone uses it for cruelty. And then we also talk about how the audacity, the cruelty of the increasing in the culture, so that prior to a turning point in the last century, there were certain things you just didn't do. Now they're common. And so what we have seen is a whole variety of offenses that you could count on one or two hands how frequently they happened before the mid 1960s. And now they're on the front page every day, not even on the front page sometimes. Mm-hmm. And so we are convinced that that's psychological and cultural, or else they would have happened at the same rate all throughout history. The most obvious of that being sexual homicide. Serial sexual homicide has occurred all throughout history, but there was an explosion of it in the 1960s. To the point that by the time you got to the 70s, the FBI needed a behavioral science unit and people like Ann Burgess to study why on earth men were so furious at women all of a sudden. Michael and I think it has something to do with cultural changes that were going on, and we won't get into that here, but we think it's cultural. And so I think it's a fascinating topic. It's used as a textbook in a few programs. It was voted one of the top 100 true crime books ever written by short form. It's been the #1 bestseller in forensic psychology on Amazon often. Very proud of that book. You can find it anywhere. I mean, Barnes and Noble is the easiest place to get it, or Amazon or something like that, but it's always there, except when it sells out. And I am working on a book. Oh, actually, I just signed a contract. I'll be writing a book with Chris. And I can't tell you much about that, except that we'll be working on one with some other people. And I am privately working on a follow-up book to New Evil. Now that Michael has passed, I have to do it solo. So I'm doing that on top of everything else I do. And every once in a while, I squeeze in a life and sleep, but it's very rare. You know, I have a camel-like diet. You know,
Chris, shouldn't you have to read a book first to be able to write a book?
Shouldn't you have to what?
Chris, you should have to read a book before you write one, right, Chris?
Oh, Chris reads quite a lot. Chris reads quite a lot. He's a smart cook.
That's that corn dog comment.
No, but I think Chris sorely needs to write a autobiographical book.
It would be great.
I think his stories are fascinating, but they get unsung, and that's because of his natural kind of humility and self-deprecation. But the fact is that he needs a book. He's got to get boastful like the rest of us. But I think that would be great.
I can't even get to CrimeCon. They won't even have me. I'm teasing.
Oh, it's only like $300 for a ticket. You could people can raise that for you as a kindness. I mean,
oh no.
You'll get to go.
I'm teasing.
But
I'm going to go to CrimeCon though.
I think you should. You'd never stop going. It's so much.
You think? You think?
You know what it is? I did not know what to expect. I got invited to CrimeCon because I was on a show for Peacock Oxygen, and they wanted to do a panel. I had no idea. I was afraid that it was going to be, you know, people hawking, you know, gewgaws with serial killers' faces on them and things that were inappropriate. Instead, what it was really a very academic conference where people that are major names in forensics and people that are directly affected by crimes that are front page right now get together. And so things were happening, like I gave a panel, and like the mother of Ethan, the victim in Idaho, you know, is there and like stands up and comments at a panel. You know, the lawyer for Murdoch is like, you know, walking through the hallways. You know, the people are there who for missing exploited children who, you know, and are showing you things like how you put clay on a human skull to determine what the person would look like as an adult. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. And I have to tell you, you know, it's a mixed bag. I mean, you know, there are like podcasts and people that are kind of, you know, trying to claw their way to the top of the true crime community and things like that. There are some people that are a little, shall I say, you know, a little more in it for the fame, you know, popularity thing. But there are also a lot of people there who I think really have their heart in the right place, and it's a fascinating event. I have to tell you, I feel like I'm never going to stop going, and it's a wonderful networking event. I mean, if you have a podcast, you should seriously consider going to CrimeCon. I mean, you'll leave there with thousands of new followers.
Yeah, Karen and I have talked about it. I know, Josh, we should all go together.
Well, you and I had talked about that because this one's in Tennessee, right?
Yeah, it's in Nashville. And my old partner lives there. So he told me, if you come this year, you can stay with me.
I was going to say, we're not going to double up on a bed.
Nah, you know, because I know you snore.
I
anyway, you know.
And how do you know that?
You know, the one thing I do love about this guy over here, and you too, Josh. I mean, you guys are really good friends, and at the same time, though, Dr. Brucato is you know, he talks about, you know, other people and the humility of others, but this gentleman over here, it really is an amazing mind, and we're really lucky.
That's my sister.
That we have the opportunity to hear from an individual such as Dr. Brucato, and it's interesting to, you know, to watch some of the comments and stuff like that, you know, because you have such a fan base as well, you know, Gary. I mean, it's huge. And your book is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I don't think people really know the depth of your research, your study, and all of the horrific, situations that you help.
It's true. It's a nightmare of things I've seen every minute of my life.
Look, Chris, I got a place to stay in a shed in Nashville.
There you go.
There you go.
Thanks.
Shed your crime con.
That is funny.
Dr. Gary, do you know why Chris knows? Do you know how Chris knows that I snore? Yeah.
I have no, I mean, would you sleep on
I fell asleep on the phone with him once because he bored me.
He did. He was snoring.
Are you serious?
Yeah, he was exhausted. And I just sat there and waited for him to wake up. And then he woke up and we continued on the conversation as if nothing had happened.
Him and Karen were laughing at me.
I think my challenge is, and I haven't been able to figure it out yet, and Dr. Gary and I have talked about it at length. I got thrust into this, world that I'm in, years ago. And I don't get invited to very many cocktail parties, for lack of a better term. I don't think Gary and I get invited to many cocktail parties.
I go to blow them up.
Yeah, exactly.
To just say the wrong thing and send everybody racing out.
Yeah, but I was very fortunate, in my life to have the career that I had, and still do. I mean, people don't know, and I'm not one. It's not in my nature, unfortunately, to go around and say, and I get accused of it. That's what's crazy,
right?
I mean, Trev. I mean, here's a young man right here that I just think he's dynamic, and here's a young, smart kid who is really into following his heart to do the right thing for Summer Wells. I mean, he's going around, he's passing out, flyers, he's going to church events, he's doing, court, et cetera, et cetera. Trevor is a perfect example of somebody that cares about the truth and about trying to find out how can we help find this child. And that's how I met Josh in a whole different way when I first got to YouTube, which sometimes I've been on my knees saying, Lord, I'm not sure I made the right decision, but for some reason I just, we still stick to it, but till it sticks to you, for lack of a better term. But, when I first met Josh, I had no idea how this worked at all. None, zero. And, I got thrown and, burned and fired up by, certain people, I guess. And I was naive to it. I really was. I was totally naive to it. Now you put me in a room with, dead people. I got your back. I can cover you. But you put me in a room with, 50 crazy trolls. I don't know what time it is. And I learned very, very quickly. And Josh, kind of came alongside of me and he says, look, let me help you out here. You're not as handsome as me, he said. And I was like, you know what? Okay, sure. That's a good way to start.
I start most conversations.
He said, I know you don't like corn dogs. Yeah. I'm like, I'm good with that. Okay, what else is going on over here? And, then he told me his story and I listened and I learned something about him. And he preached it with authenticity. And when he started hanging out with me, he got hammered for hanging out with me, and we just kind of looked at each other and laughed and said, well, there you go. Welcome to the jungle. He told me that from his side and I told him that from mine. And now I think the three of us here in this conversation tonight, the lab rats, we're honored to be here. I mean, and you've got a great thing going, Josh. I hope you get up to 200, 300, 400, 500,000, if not more, because you and Trevor and many others, you have the right heart. And that's what counts. That's what counts out here. I mean, Gary and I have been doing this for so many years now, and we are focused on the victims and the victims' families, because that is what counts. everything else is irrelevant. There's no better feeling than walking out of a courtroom and having a family come up to you with tears rolling down their face, and they're shaking, and they give you a big hug, and you know you've made a friend for life. Yet you won't remember them because there's too many of them. But you know for that very brief moment, the universe was on schedule. God put you in the right place at the right moment. And if it meant that one person, you take it, you grab that hug, and you say, that's okay. You'll be fine now. Keep moving.
Right.
And that's what it's about. And Josh, you have that heart. You have a servant's heart.
Right.
And
right. But Chris, until you've been in that pit with those people, you don't understand the joy that comes on the other side, the grace that you experience. Remember, blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. The idea is that feeling of being filled up with grace can only be experienced by somebody who's experienced total and complete unfairness, injustice, misery, terrible. That's why we don't make any sense to people, because we spend all day talking to perverts and murderers and people with all kinds of severe problems, but we look like a couple of schoolboys cracking jokes and having fun and whatever. But what it is that it's only when you've been plunged into that depth of darkness that you can be totally appreciative of light. And I think that's what it is. And I think people who are like that recognize it in one another. I mean, what you have here, and I love it, is that Chris was doing this podcast, and then I came along because I think I represent the light expanding, from his little fire. And now you've joined. It's like the Lucky Charms. Pretty soon we'll get up to the purple horseshoes and all the little things they keep adding to the cereal. Well, at some point, there'll be more people and more people and more, because the fire keeps expanding, and that's what happens. The light spreads. And, so here we are, the three of us, and soon there'll be 4 and 5 and 6 until people can't stand it anymore. Now they're Lucky Charms in the chat. But you get what I'm saying is it's all about taking a tiny thing and expanding it. And that's what ultimately is going to happen with a lot of these cases is that when the force of light gets large enough, you can't hide any dirty deed. Eventually, enough people who are goodwill to get involved and the truth comes out. And you just have to have faith about that, whether it's now or on the day of judgment, that deed is coming out. There's no hiding it. So you don't have to worry about that. Justice comes one way or another. I mean, Chris, don't you believe that?
Absolutely. And I think we all need to keep not only Summer in our thought and our prayers, but we also need to keep Brandy and Michael Vaughn in our prayers.
Oh, yes.
And keep that clarity of focus for all. And there are hundreds of children. Something's happening in this country, in the world, quite frankly, not just the country. And
new evil.
It is a new evil. I mean, Gary's been on it because we've talked about it, behind the scenes here.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's going to be interesting the next 10, 15 years with the social media and the dynamics.
Right.
Did you see the Kentucky senator today arguing about allowing dolls for pedophiles, child dolls for pedophiles?
I promptly put it out of my consciousness.
But can you believe that?
Yeah,
have we lost our minds?
I can believe it. Yes,
we have lost our minds.
Right. And there are also cases that happen now, Chris, with a routine quality that get those really high rankings in the scale that Michael and I talk about. Like you could actually watch them increasing. There was a case in Delaware where they gave a couple 106 years for 20 months of torturing the kids. 20 months. A woman and a man who, she was the stepmother, I think. He was and if I remember correctly, the torture was so outrageous that, it was like they gave them 106 years as if they were murderers for the torture of the kids. I mean, that's what you're dealing with. Those kind of cases are becoming essentially routine. The other thing that's very strange to people like me who studied this stuff is that these used to be crimes that were really only committed by men. And in the modern culture, you're now seeing female cannibals, female serial killers, females that torture their own children to death, and you really have to ask yourself, what the heck is going on with that? That's another major change that's happening that to criminologists is very odd, is that the statistics on who commits murder are changing.
But what has changed in society to cause that?
Well, you want to have a 5-hour conversation? I mean, you could.
I mean, I do,
have an episode about it.
3-hour one.
I will tease it, and people can read it in The New Evil, I guess. But I think that is a very complicated question. But the fact is, if it was biological, there would be the same rates of these things all across time and space, and they are not the same rates. There's something sick about the culture, particularly Western culture. And, I have a whole hypothesis about what it's about that would be very long-winded at this point. But I think it has to be discussed because there's something sick going on in this culture. Chris, I have to tell you, the society is keeping people like me and you a little too busy.
Yeah.
We have a crime of the century every month. We can't even keep up with them, And, and the fact is, we're all very intrigued by this Summer Wells case. But the fact is that in the annals of crime, I hate to say it, it's fairly garden variety.
Yeah. I mean, and what people don't.
Right. Decades ago.
And then this is the last thing I'll say, Josh. I know you're going to shut down here, but
yeah.
Back in the day, right? 1990.
Right.
I was sent in when I went to homicide. 91 comes around. They say, okay, this is where you're going. And for the audience that probably doesn't know, I mean, some may or may not know, but I'll tell you, my expertise is criminal behavior analysis in relationship to pedophilia during homicide, i.e. guys that are killing kids for sexual gratification.
Uh-huh.
That was my training, was my study, et cetera, et cetera. Today, the things that we were learning back then, and Dr. Brucato knows, I got a chance to meet his mentor, Dr. Stone, because he spoke in front of me at a conference that I spoke at in Wisconsin years ago. It was a homicide conference, and that guy was just like amazing. Amazing. And I talked about, the making of a child killer. But then I got a chance to meet Gary and the studies that they have done, he and Dr. Petrecka and others. I'm telling you guys, the public here and the lab rats, the kind of conversations that these, people are having, politicians or whoever they are, the universe, metaverse, or whatever that's going to be called, right? Ultimately, where we're headed are training grounds. What we're doing is we're training the mind and the brain to see children only objectively, completely, not as human beings, but as sexual objects. And if we start providing people with dolls and pretend dolls and et cetera, that fuel, and I was known for the guy that coined the terminology, the advent of the intellectual white-collar predator as a result of the internet. Okay. And this was 1993. Okay. If we think about that principle today, where you have politicians saying, hey, you know what? The way we control this is give them things, dolls, so that way they won't go after our children. Okay. I'm here to tell you, and Dr. Gary knows a million times more than me. Okay. We have lost our minds. The floodgates will be open. Not a single child in this country will be safe. I stood over Matthew Checky's body in when he was murdered in the bathroom. I advocated or family restrooms around this country. I was on the Oprah Winfrey show talking about it back then. And today, they're hunting grounds. They're just opened to anybody. It's very scary. I worry about my grandkids, and I have 5 of them. And, you know, Josh, I think we should have a show on this.
I do too. I think that this is a topic that we should absolutely discuss. I feel, you know, I'll tell you this, Chris and I's relationship, what you're seeing here is about 1% of our relationship. Yeah. Chris and I talk all the time. We stay in constant communication about things. And we feel similar in a lot of situations. You know, we don't agree on everything, but in these situations, like this doll business and just this, you know, flipping of societal norms, you know, I am old enough now at 38 to realize that this wasn't how it was when I was 20, 15, 12. And, you know, I kind of look around and go, you know, where exactly are we headed? I'll drive by, you know, I don't live too far from the high school. I'll drive by and I'll go, oh my God, if there's World War III, we're in big trouble. You know, because it's like it's skinny jeans and blue hair as far as the eye can see. And, you know, as nothing wrong with dyeing your hair or anything like that, but it is now being implemented that, you know, these taboo things are fine. And I don't believe that, right. You know, and so I would love to do a show like that.
Well, you know, I think maybe a good way to close is when Michael passed away, I was amazed by this. I mean, the New York Times, which, you know, they consider a few letters of print like real estate, you know, that they don't want to waste, right? It wasn't even clear they were even going to do an obituary on Michael. And when they did, they used up a large amount of space to quote at length a paragraph that I wrote to close out the New Evil. Okay? Meaning that they thought it was important enough to put in the New York Times. I mean, this amazed me. Okay? And I'll read it to you. It's not going to take long, but I think it'll convey what we're saying here. It says, in the meantime, the world's peoples will carry on, as always, making choices to kill, maim, steal, kidnap, rape, abuse, and hate, or else heal, give, share, respect, and love. Although, as we have seen, various demographic, psychological, situational, and genetic factors might incline some individuals more than others to criminal behaviors, it appears that the bulk of evil actions are the result of selfish choices made by fully cognizant individuals. In this era of new evil, we have seen the rise of a sort of false compassion in which the most relentless psychopathic persons are sometimes viewed as victims, driven to crime by terrible circumstances that have overridden their minds' braking systems. There is minimal emphasis on the role of personal will and the consequences of one's actions. This growing tendency to blame outside forces is, in fact, a hallmark of narcissism, now encountered on a sweeping societal scale. For many of the offenders in our terrible catalog, the issue at hand has been one of power and control, as a sad substitute for basic, stable love, never known or understood. It is our ardent hope that after a period of terrible growing pains, our culture will eventually learn that true power and control come only after a lifelong process of mastering and inhibiting the self and coming to understand oneself as a small yet integral droplet in a vast ocean of other people, never more valuable than others and never capable of standing alone. In doing so, we may elevate ourselves above the animal and ugly aspects of the post-1960s era of new evil, entering a period of new goodness. Perhaps as a first step, we should admit that the water in our collective pot is growing disquietly warmer day by day. And they quoted it. Can you imagine? I swear it was like a wake-up, like blinking lights. Because I think that when we said this, it was pretty prescient. Because people who poo-pooed this write to me all the time. And they say, I have to admit, We really are in an era of new evil. So, and I just thought it was so fascinating that they published such a chunk of, right, So, but anyway, don't you think that about sums it up?
Sums it up.
It couldn't be put much better. And yeah, I would love to discuss this even more with you guys. I think it is an important conversation
Let's do it.
So with that being said, Chris is ready to fall asleep. I'm going to fall asleep. Gary looks a little hungry.
It was worth it. Gary is hungry. Yes.
He is hungry. Okay, good deal.
I never am not hungry.
Aloha, lab rats. Thank you so much for having us tonight, Josh.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys soon.
It was quite fascinating. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. And there it was, folks. I really appreciate them and their time. What a great show it was. Dr. Gary and Chris, both just top notch. Top notch. I want to thank everybody for being here. Let me just make sure that I don't leave any. Romans chapter 1 explains what's happening today. Rosie says, thank you all for sharing your vast knowledge. 3 impressive minds. I appreciate you saying that. And yes, I agree that they are the best of the best. Thank you for all the gifted memberships and just being here, talking with us. And thank you guys so much. Subscribe if you want. You guys have a good night.